Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. They had returned to complete darkness. It was the first thing that Sasuke noticed as the two of them practically fell out of the purple portal. When Sasuke's feet hit the ground on the other side, he pulled Sakura to him as the two quickly tipped, causing Sasuke to land somewhat ungracefully on his back. Catching the brunt of their fall, Sasuke hissed. It took the Uchiha a second to process that they had made it back into their own dimension, before he ended the jutsu and the spiraling door of his time-space technique collapsed upon itself. It was hard to see it because of the dimness around them, and Sasuke realized it must be either late night or early morning. The absence of feeling completely drained had Sasuke's attention immediately turning to the kunoichi, whom he still held tightly to his chest through their connected hands. He could feel that she was breathing, which was a relief, and his alarm faded slightly when her chin brushed against his chest and he found himself staring into her conscious green eyes, somewhat visible in the dark. Sakura blinked hard and Sasuke could practically feel the black marks slipping from his body as they returned to her, entangling their joined hands and quickly receding up her chin, cheeks, and forehead. Sasuke realized he was still clenching her hand even after the chakra stripes faded, and after a second, he came to his senses and released it immediately, moving his arm to support her back as he tried to sit up. In response, Sakura did some sort of scrambling motion to relieve him of her weight, which had them both awkwardly fighting each other's moves to detangle themselves. Sakura began in a flustered rasp. Suddenly embarrassed, Sasuke jerked back his hand and let go of her completely at the exact same moment that she tried to lurch away. This only resulted in Sakura falling over the side of his leg and landing onto her hands and knees. Sorry, she breathed, not righting herself and remaining crouched as she caught her breath. Sasuke berated himself for his actions next, but he was unable to conceal his concern. Grabbing her upper arm, he pulled her up and helped her settle against a tree. Because of the lack of light, Sasuke didn't move too far away from her so that he might still see her face. Uchiha knelt in front of her for a long minute before he asked genuinely, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Why did you do that?" Sasuke asked quietly, still only a foot's distance away from her. Still breathing hard, Sakura looked up to meet his eyes. She blinked at him innocently. "What? Why did you do that?" he bit out, which caused the kunoichi to furrow her eyebrows together in reproach, not understanding his irate tone. Sasuke didn't even realize that there was anger bobbing on the surface of his worry, until the words were out of his mouth. "I just wanted to help," she began, but Sasuke interrupted her. With that same edged tone, he said, "You tricked me." "No," she began, but in his anger, Sasuke kept talking. He got closer to her face than he had originally intended to. "Is that what a partnership means to you? Surrendering yourself like that?" Sasuke knew it was a harsh accusation, and that Sakura had meant nothing negative by doing so. He was thoroughly impressed at her strength, but that didn't matter to him anymore. He had stopped evaluating others' worth by their power. Before, he would have calculated how to use that power in the future. Sasuke would have thought something like, "Better her than me," and told her not to let her fatigue keep them from moving forward. He couldn't help feeling like him before, as his body was currently experiencing the result of what Sakura had done at her own expense. Not only had she completely bypassed his own chakra network and directly supplied his dojutsu with the chakra it needed, but the medic had also pumped his body so full of her own energy that it left Sasuke with more chakra than when he had teleported them to that forsaken realm to begin with. She had emptied herself so that he might be restored in all his strength. A partnership didn't leave the other party at their worst. It left the Uchiha feeling like he had used her, like he had done with so many others. That was why he was hesitant to rely on her strength of 100 seal to begin with. "Sasuke," she began between gasps. "I'm sorry." No, he thought. She needed to know exactly what he thought. "I have spent years taking from others and feeling absolutely nothing once they were reduced to the state that you are now in. Is that what you want to be to me? She continued to blink at him in the dark, and Sasuke realized something as he recalled what she had told him twice before: I will help you get your revenge. That's who she thought he wanted her to be to him. The thought almost made him physically ill. That's not a partnership. He hissed in her face and stood up. That's not balanced. You lied. Yes, she admitted. If you put it like that, then I lied. But I did what I believed was best. I am fine, and I still have chakra. Transferring you that much chakra was because of what I did back at the toe, but she stopped and her eyes widened as they focused on something past him. Feeling the hairs suddenly stand on the back of his neck and arm, Sasuke turned, silent and aware that someone had just appeared at his back. When he spun, Sasuke effortlessly pulled his sword from its sheath and held it between himself and the enemy, all while wearing that signature glare of his. Placing himself in front of his teammate, Sasuke pointed his blade at the multitude of shadowy figures that now stood scattered around them and between the trees. A million thoughts went through Sasuke's mind when he realized that there were several of them and he and Sakura were now completely surrounded. One thought being that he felt like an amateur for not assessing their surroundings more closely. The second was that he needed to get Sakura out of here without ducking into a dimension this time. Sasuke didn't know how the enemy knew where they would appear, but he needed to deal with these strange ninja who were after them, once and for all. There were no more thoughts after that as he allowed himself to slip into a calm, fierce determination to kill each and every single one of them that so much as came near them. But when a voice called out to them through the darkness, a bell of recognition rang throughout Sasuke's head that eased his alarm slightly. Who are you? The ninja called out with edged authority in his voice. Tell us why you are here. Sasuke's Sharingan flashed in the ninja's direction, but Sasuke didn't lower his sword even when he approached, until he heard Sakura say his name, Kankuro. Frowning, Sasuke lowered his blade. Because he and Sakura didn't use the previous door, Sasuke realized then that the teleportation must have brought them 2 hours west. They had practically tumbled out onto the border between the lands of wind and rivers. How convenient. But why did they have to run into these guys so soon? It was then that Sasuke recognized the ninja by the faint purple markings on his face and the shinobi symbol of Tsunagaku on his forehead. When the puppet master came within a few feet of them, he raised his hand in silent communication for his companions. Kankuro smiled largely at them in recognition. Ah, Uchiha and Sakura, we have been expecting you. Still sitting on the ground, Sakura asked up at the approaching ninja, a smile spreading across her face. You were expecting us? Kankuro nodded at them, confirming, we got your message, Sasuke. As soon as we heard that the two of you were headed this way, we were sent to intercept you. The two of us? Sakura asked. Yes, he explained with a knowing smile. Along with Sasuke's letter, we received word from the Hokage that Konoha's most renowned medic might also be in company. Sasuke couldn't help but narrow his eyes at the unexpected compliment, something fierce honing itself within. An escort for the Hokage's pupils is the least we can do, he finished despite Sasuke's glare. Not to mention that you both played a part in saving the world. We thank you, Sakura replied with a blush. When she spoke, Sasuke and Kankuro both noticed that she did so breathlessly as the result of her weariness. She made to stand, and the puppet master instinctively reached out towards her with concern when she stumbled slightly. Are you okay there? Before Kankuro could so much as offer her his help, Sasuke intercepted her himself. He didn't know why he did it, but the Uchiha quickly grabbed her elbow with his right hand and lifted it over his head as if it were the most casual thing for him to do. It took Sakura a blinking second to register that Sasuke was offering her assistance, but she quickly settled into his side. Long journey, she explained simply to the sand ninja, making quick eye contact with Sasuke before letting her gaze fall back on the puppet master. Sasuke cleared his throat after Kankuro watched them silently for longer than a few seconds. We'll get you some refreshments as soon as we are back in Tsunagaku, Kankuro promised. He turned then, motioning for a few ninja to come forward. Accepting their new orders as scouts, the unfamiliar ninja nodded and disappeared in the trees. After a few conversations between shinobi, they were ready to make the remaining voyage towards Sunagakure. Even in the dark, Sasuke could glimpse flashes of Sakura's embarrassed flush as Sasuke supported her weight. He did his best to hide his own as his hand fisted into the clothing closest to her hip. He drew her nearer so that he supported most of her weight. When her eyes grew wide, Sasuke offered her a one-word explanation that both reminded her of their unfinished dispute and assured her of its finish. Balance. Sasuke also hoped the word reached her in another way. He wanted to prove to her that he could be a partner that didn't solely take. He would carry the kunoichi the whole damn way if he had to. Sakura Haruno gazed out at the ripples of pink glistened sand that rose into small dunes ahead of them. The sunrise at their caravan's backs practically highlighted the desert hills in such a way that the sight shaped Sakura's perceptions of beauty. Wow! Sakura exclaimed upon seeing the rosy scenery. She had only ever walked this path during midday when the sun was at its highest and hottest, which always had Sakura grateful for her fortunate, and much cooler, upbringing in the leaf. It was dumbfounding how the time of day had her reconsidering her dislike for the desert. A small laughter brought Sakura back from her meditative appreciation, and she blinked when a younger kunoichi from the group, someone Sakura had never talked to before, walked up beside Sakura and remarked, "It matches your hair." Oh, Sakura grinned at the ninja, reaching up to finger her hair with her free hand. "You think so?" "Yes," the girl exclaimed, "it reminded me of the sunrise as soon as I saw you. It's very beautiful." Sakura grinned shyly at the girl. The female ninja then looked at Sasuke with that same enthusiasm. "Yours is the opposite, because it looks like nightfall." Sakura swore that Sasuke's uncaring attitude and blank expression is the reason she ran up to the front of the group soon after. Kankuro, who was currently leading their company, called back, "If you like this, then you should see the desert during sunset. I'll have to make sure to see it while we are here." She called out to him. Why she had never cared to see before, she didn't know. Most likely because every time she had been here prior, she had been incredibly preoccupied. Sasuke, who had remained quiet for their entire trek, shuffled her weight on his shoulders to regain her attention because he was preparing to move forward again. When their feet slid a little bit in the sand, Sakura offered him an embarrassed grin. "I think I am all right now, Sasuke," she admitted despite how much she was enjoying their tread. She thought back to all the times she offered Sasuke her support in the same way just to be next to him. That was such a long time ago. Sakura made to take back her arm, but Sasuke didn't release his hold on her side. He only continued to move forward and said, "Anyone can see that you are dead on your feet. You'll only slow us down, so I guess I'm just going to have to drag you the whole way." Sakura scowled at him. He certainly had a way to spoil the pleasant moments between them. But even when he turned his head, Sakura could see the small upturn of Sasuke's lips at her glower. "Annoying?" she asked, testing the word on her lips. The word's connotation seemed to be changing in her mind the more that the two of them used it, which was very often. "Unfortunately." He snorted in agreement. "Insufferable." Thoroughly enjoying their small banter, Sakura replied with a closed-eyed grin, "Get used to it." Sasuke didn't say anything to that. They fell back into a silence, so Sakura's eyes flashed back and forth for a second as she worked up the courage to take advantage of it. Everyone else in their escort was several paces ahead of them, so Sakura readdressed their tense conversation from earlier. She sighed. "I have to admit something else to you." Sasuke's expression completely changed as he eyed her apprehensively. "What?" Sakura had tried to tell him this before Kankuro and the other sand ninja approached them. Bringing it up now took twice the nerve. "While you were asleep back in Kagaya's tower, I went exploring the dimension by myself." There was silence. No answer. But before he could think of a response, she also blurted, and what's worse, is that I might have. She took a breath, even coaxed your body into a longer sleep. The Uchiha's black and purple eyes flashed at her then, and his feet faltered a step. You did what? He hissed. Cringing guiltily, Sakura rubbed the back of her neck and dropped her eyes to the right. I just wanted to prove to you that I could help. I didn't know that helping you sleep would keep you from waking up. Your body must have really needed the rest. I'm sorry. Sakura knew that if his hand wasn't currently fisted into her side, it would have gone up to pinch the bridge of his nose. After an annoyed sigh, Sasuke just tugged her closer, which she thought impossible until it happened. If you want this partnership to work, I have to be able to trust you. That was a very stupid thing to do, and all you accomplish by doing things like that is making me regret bringing you. Sakura blinked at that word, trust, and flinched inwardly at his words. The weight of them made her entire being feel heavy with disappointment. How could she explain her desire to prove to him that she could be useful? His earlier words came to mind. Is that what you want to be to me? After a long minute, Sasuke spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. I know who you are. I know what you are capable of. I know your power. You can stop trying to prove to me that you aren't weak. Her eyes widened at the comment, which was so completely unexpected. It was like Sasuke was suddenly talking to her for the first time, outright acknowledging her. It was what she had always wanted, to hear him say those words. Little did she know that she had already proven herself to him. She tucked his words, and the feelings with them, away in her heart. Face blank from any expression, Sasuke said again, while we travel together, we can rely on one another, as you call it. But there are guidelines. Still somewhat elated at this sudden progress between them, Sakura nodded enthusiastically. Anything. I have to trust you. So don't be stupid. Sakura immediately frowned. What did she honestly expect? Also, no more stunts like earlier. In other words, he wanted to be balanced. He wanted it to be a 50-50 partnership. Symbiotic and equal. That one, Sakura could agree to, even though she still didn't regret what she did with her power earlier. When she thought about it, maybe that's how Sasuke wanted it to be, because he considered her his equal now. Sakura wouldn't hold her breath on that one. She just smiled, looked ahead, and said, okay. Sasuke should have added more guidelines to their agreement. And as he walked towards Sunagaku through that beautiful garnet desert with its look-alike at his hip, he knew precisely what he needed to add. No more of this, either. But Sasuke didn't want to add that one. When they arrived at the cleft between the cliffs leading into Sunagaku, Sakura recalled the dream she had had when her and Ino had visited the village hidden in the sand to discuss the children's clinic. The night before they had arrived, Sakura dreamt vividly about Sasuke waiting for her at the village gates. When she had approached him, he had patted her head and had said her name in a way that had suggested he was about to confess his feelings to her. Sakura remembered clinging desperately to the vision even after it faded, and how disappointed she had felt when she finally did make it to Suna and found that Sasuke was not waiting for her as she had dreamt. Peering to her left, Sakura felt somewhat embarrassed at the memory, especially now as she caught Sasuke's emotionless expression as the Uchiha stared up at the towering cliffs. He stood slightly behind her now, having let go of her much earlier due to the fact that she couldn't keep up the excuse of exhaustion while simultaneously talking Kankuro's ear off about how Temari was managing in the Leaf Village. She had instantly regretted speaking so much when Sasuke ducked from under her arm and rubbed the back of his sweaty neck where her arm had been. Sakura supposed the rising heat had made it unbearable to support someone who didn't really need it. Recalling the dream again, Sakura felt somewhat ridiculous to have hoped that her relationship with Sasuke could progress as quickly as seeing him realizing he loved her, and the two of them moving forward all in one day. In fact, it had been several weeks now since he had returned to the village, and Sakura had felt like the only one who was even trying to move in that particular direction was her. Granted, Sasuke had agreed to a partnership between them, which was a step towards their former friendship. But friendship alone wasn't enough for her when it came to Sasuke, and he had drawn a very clear line. Sakura suddenly felt like her silly, genuine self again. She should be grateful for what progress they had made towards friendship. Like she had told Sasuke back home, if he couldn't love her, then at least give her his friendship. He was trying, and she should not be wanting more. If it's okay with you, Kankuro shouted from up ahead, the party now moving into the shadows of the canyon entrance. Our first stop is to see the cage. I do believe he expects an explanation for your visit. Of course, Sakura announced, moving along more quickly now as she realized the distracted pace of her walking. She glanced back at Sasuke, who was coolly staring ahead. The Uchiha didn't even acknowledge her directed gaze as he placed his hand in his pocket and let his eyes fall to the ground. This passive Sasuke was a sharp contrast to the one who had just supported her moments ago, but he was the more familiar one. Sasuke was trying to focus on the goal of his mission. He really was. However, when Kankuro announced that they were on their way to see Gaara, Sasuke couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't that he was nervous, annoyed, or anything else so simple as that. His aerial message had been intended to reach Gaara and express Sasuke's desire to meet with him immediately. Sasuke just didn't exactly know how this meeting would go, and it was this unpredictability that he hated. When the idea of coming here first formed in his thoughts, Sasuke also imagined a couple different scenarios about how the cage would take to him. Sasuke hadn't exactly been in Gaara's presence since the war, and before that, Sasuke had tried to kill him at the 5-Cage Summit after the Sand Wielder approached him for a chat. That chat didn't go so well. Sasuke had complete respect for Gaara as a ninja and Kage, but they had never really been friends or even so much as acquaintances. The two of them had actually been enemies, and Sasuke had left the village before he saw the outcome of Naruto and Gaara's battle. It was something of a shock really when Gaara approached him at the summit as a new person. And, he thought, glancing up at the kunoichi in front of him, he had believed he would be coming alone to take the brunt of Gaara's judgment. Instead, Sakura was accompanying him there and would be a witness to the consequences of his past actions. Sasuke supposed that this was the part he was dreading. What made things even more irritating was the fact that Sakura walked with ease through the stucco houses along the path towards the core of the village. Even a few of the citizens and shinobi that lingered to watch them pass, raised their hands in greeting when the familiar pink-haired medic smiled in their direction. This made Sasuke even more hesitant. Unlike himself, she was so welcome and treated with respect and friendliness. In sharp contrast, Sasuke received various looks of confusion, fear, and distrust. Just like in the Leaf Village. It was how it should be, Sasuke thought. Sakura was so in place and the Uchiha was so out of place. It was at this point that Sakura fell back to walk beside him. She smiled and quickly grazed his fingertips with her own. It was so fast that Sasuke wasn't sure it had been on purpose. He gave her his best reprimanding scowl anyway. He wished she would stop doing that already. Sakura giggled. Sasuke noticed that some of the looks he was receiving changed instantaneously when she neared him with such playfulness. Sasuke realized then what it was that she was doing. He was grateful. They know you. He said it at the same time that he made the connection. Sakura had told him on the way here about her involvement in the Cage's rescue. Not only this, but she had defeated one of the Sand's most notorious criminals while working closely with the village's highly revered puppet master, Lady Chiyo. Sasuke had something of an epiphany as he gazed at the woman. He was being reminded again of how Sakura, too, had made a mark on the world, all while Sasuke simultaneously built another sort of reputation for himself. How odd to think about how they did balance each other somewhat perfectly. Who else, other than a medical proficient that saved lives, to undo the damage of someone who had taken them? Only a hero could walk beside a criminal and make the world see them in a different light. Sakura's answer broke this train of thought. A few of them do, she responded, turning to those ninjas and waving back at them. Dot 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 dot. When they finally made it through the maze of buildings and reached the Feng-labeled heart of the village, it only took a few seconds more before they were brought before the round table of the Suna Council. At the same time that she and Sasuke were being escorted in by Kankuro, Sakura released a sigh of relief as the council members stood to make their way out of the spherical room. Gaara remained seated at the table even though a few of his advisors halted when they saw the faces of the new arrivals. Gaara gestured for them to leave once more, and the murmuring men dismissed themselves hesitantly. The cage stood after they were gone and motioned for the two of them to sit. After bowing, they did so politely, claiming the two seats directly in front of Gaara. Kankuro moved to Gaara's direct right, standing formally behind his leader. Sakura couldn't help but notice how quickly Sasuke fell into his emotionless persona, avoiding the cage's direct gaze, and placing one arm casually on the table in front of him. In response, the cage eyed him blankly for a second and then directed all conversation in her direction. "Welcome to Sunagaku," he said formally. "Thank you," Sakura smiled in response, gratefully clasping the refreshment that was placed down in front of her by a servant she hadn't noticed entering from an alcove behind her. "We are grateful for the escort you sent to retrieve us. You didn't need to go to the trouble." The cage shared a brief glance with Kankuro at the statement, and Sakura realized that there was a silent non-verbal exchange of thought between siblings. Kankuro decided to clarify then, the cage leaving it to his brother to explain. "We believed it necessary, not just for your safety from foreign ninja between lands like I told you before, but for the peace of our villagers as well." Sasuke glanced up sharply at the puppet master, narrowing his eyes in understanding. A wrench twisted immediately in Sakura's gut. So they were already getting straight to it, then. The Kunoichi had predicted it to be highly possible that they might run into some hostility from Sungaku considering Sasuke's past. She had hoped their relationship with Gaara might alleviate the trouble. "What do you mean?" she asked the cage as respectfully as she could under scrutiny. "I have been blunt with you before, Sakura. The last time you were here," Gaara announced in that same formal tone, linking his fingers together upon the table. He met eyes with Sasuke again, directly addressing him this time. "I want you to know that as cage, I must take every precaution during your visit. I understand you to be a changed man according to Naruto's word, and for that I welcome you, but while you are here, I have to ensure that you are the man that Naruto says you are. This village comes before all else." The cerulean of Gaara's eyes were without reaction, filled with neither anger or judgment, but a blankness Sakura recognized in many of her own sensei's expressions when he gave orders or calculated ninja. Sasuke presented his chin and met the cage's eyes directly, and Sakura's blood turned ice cold in her limbs. Her terror thawed as Sasuke responded after a minute with a clear, "I understand." He ducked his head again, and a sudden fire replaced the fear that filled the back of Sakura's throat. "Has he not proven so already?" she asked reproachfully. "He is one of the heroes of the Shinobi War. Without him, there wouldn't be any villages." All blinking eyes turned towards her as she spoke. She took a deep breath and nervously took a drink out of the cup she held in her hand, realizing the tone of disrespect lacing those words. She understood Gaara. She really did, but to see Sasuke accept those words as if he deserved them, made her speak out of turn. "He has indeed," Gaara reassured her. "We all believed so until the rumors that spread about you, Sasuke, pertaining to a bargain made with missing sand ninja to perform a coup d'état in Suna in exchange for their assistance to destroy Konoha." Sakura instantly recalled the circumstances revolving around Kido, the man who had been trying to get Sasuke to return to the village by using an impersonator to stir up trouble in his name. "That wasn't me," Sasuke responded civilly, also recognizing the situation Gaara was referring to. Sakura had come here to speak to Gaara about her hopes of implementing a mental health and children's hospital in Sunagaku, and Gaara had informed her about this situation, to which she had tried to take Sasuke's defense. She brought that up now. I spoke on his behalf the last time I was here, and I was correct in my theory of a double. It was an attempt to ruin Sasuke's reputation. Sasuke met eyes then. There was a brief look of surprise, and then the emotion faded from his face as he turned back to the Kazekage and said, I am responsible for my own ruined name, which allowed those men to take advantage of it. Sorry to have caused your village trouble. Sakura looked sadly at the man that she loved, feeling a mixture of anger and pride towards such a statement. Kankuro and Gaara exchanged another nod towards one another. Sakura supposed they were accepting his rare apology. She was beginning to think they hadn't been expecting to receive one. Do what you must, Sasuke said with a dismissive hand and annoyed exhale towards the subject. I am here on a personal mission to investigate a bigger threat towards all of our villages. It is something I must speak with you, the Kazekage, about in private. Both Kankuro's and the Kazekage's eyebrows jumped towards their hairlines. There was a very serious silence that spread throughout the room, and Sakura's heart quickened as two of the world's most powerful ninjas waited for the other to say something. She jumped at the sound of her own name. Sakura. Gaara turned his attention to her. Kakashi has told me that you are on your own mission, is that correct? Yes, sir, she nodded, adding briefly, I am hoping to check in on Sunagaku's own mental health clinic, as well as share some of my own medical findings with your hospital's doctors, if I may. I would also like to assist in any way medically during our time here. With your permission. Gaara offered her a gentle smile, the first during their entire meeting so far. She smiled back, grateful for the shift in atmosphere. Of course, he replied, you are always welcome here, and we are honored to have your medical expertise and guidance in our facilities. He signaled for Kankuro then, and Sakura realized all too quickly that this was her cue to depart. Kankuro, please accompany the doctor to our hospital and make sure she has everything that she requires while she is with us. When Kankuro came to her side, Sakura rose slowly and bowed to Gaara, saying a quick thank you. We'll set up lodgings for you in the meantime, Gaara informed her. Please do not hesitate to call on me should there be anything you need while you are here. Sakura turned and caught Sasuke's eyes. He didn't say anything, barely even looked her in the eye, but he dipped his head briefly in reassurance. Saying nothing else, she followed Kankuro out the door, leaving the two shinobi to their confidentiality. Sasuke had frowned when Gaara had dismissed her, even if he had practically asked him to. Sasuke's shinobi ears had listened as his teammates' footsteps faded down the hall, and Sasuke suddenly felt a sensation similar to that of losing his arm. Not the pain. Sasuke would describe it as the feeling of having become used to something and realizing abruptly that it wasn't there anymore. After they had left, Gaara raised both of his hands in the air, and Sasuke's eyes widened as the buzzing sound of the Kazecage's sand filled the air around them. Before Sasuke could react defensively, Gaara explained his actions. The walls, he motioned outward, and large quantities of sand appeared from the air and began to crawl up the room's fortifications and build out from it, thickening them an extra several inches. There was a cracking sound as the sand compacted into every groove, covering every opening, and sealing every door. Sasuke realized suddenly that he wasn't being entombed, but that the Kazekage was honoring his request with the utmost precaution. If this is as serious as you are claiming it to be, Gaara finished, resting his relaxed hands back on the table as if it had cost him nothing to perform the action, then we cannot risk anyone listening in. Agreed. Sasuke confirmed, relaxing back into his seat. What is this threat that you are investigating, Uchiha, and why does it bring you to my village? And so Sasuke told him all that knew about Kagaya, the White Zetsu army, and the threat that this knowledge revealed about what could potentially come. It was a theory, but an informed one, and Gaara listened with the highest interest. Sasuke also conveyed to the Kazekage that coming here did not mean any immediate danger for Suna, but that it would help Sasuke immensely if he was granted permission to test a hypothesis of his in the desert climate just outside of his village. I see, the Kazekage nodded, crossing his arms in contemplation after all the intelligence had been given. Does the other cage know about this? No, Sasuke answered immediately and seriously. Other than Team 7, you are the only one to know. I do this to personally earn your trust. I will make an official announcement when the Leaf decides to call a 5-cage meeting. But why wait? The Sand Wielder countered. If you are correct, time cannot be wasted in preparing the other cage. Sasuke nodded in thought and said, it's a theory only. There's no reason to unease everyone just yet. At least, until I can investigate it a little further myself. The Hokage has agreed to this. Gaara offered his understanding. I trust Kakashi Hataki's judgment. If he thinks the news should wait, then I will agree with his decision. The future should stay bright for as long as possible, Sasuke said habitually. It was the Uchiha's personal vision, and he had said it often to Naruto and others close to him. Speaking it to Gaara was an accident. Gaara's surprised gape met his and Sasuke quickly covered with, you understand why telling you first might result in feelings of unrest from the other cage. I do not want them thinking it means a tipped preference in connection between our two villages. I ask that you keep this intel between us and pretend it will be the first time you are hearing it at the cage meeting. Gaara once again agreed, considerate of the precautions on a military level. When the sand began to slide and crumble from the walls, Sasuke assumed that meant their conversation was coming to a close. He was about to rise before Gaara spoke silently, and Sakura. She knows about all of this. Sasuke's black and purple eyes slid up to the cage's face in calculative scrutiny. After a minute, he answered honestly with a resolved, yes. Do you think that is wise? To share this with her? Gaara asked the Uchiha, narrowing his eyes at him in judgment. Sasuke bit back the defensive retort that sprang forth from his ever-ready Uchiha mouth. Sasuke didn't know why he would be questioning his decision to do so unless the Kazekage believed it to be a mistake. Just as I trust Kakashi and Naruto, I trust the third member of my team, Sasuke responded unemotionally. As you have observed, Sakura has chosen to accompany me. I wanted her to be aware of the seriousness of the situation. Gaara seemed to relax a little at Sasuke's answer. It is for her safety that I ask. You put her in harm's way with the information you have trusted her with. Just by knowing, she is a target. Sasuke internally flinched. He was all too aware of this. He had told it to himself over and over and over. If it had been up to him, Sasuke would have excluded her from the know, left her in Konoha, oblivious to all of it, that is if the stubborn woman would have stood for it. No, if she insisted on following him, she needed to know. It would be more dangerous for her not to. Sasuke replied, she is capable, and I have faith in her abilities should she find herself in such a situation where someone might. I don't question her skills, Gaara interrupted him. We are talking about the Kunoichi who helped save my life, my brothers, and helped defeat Sasori when Kankuro could not. Not to mention that she played an essential part in the war against Kagaya. No, I don't doubt her strength. Sasuke felt an odd emotion in his stomach. This was the ninja that Sasuke had fought all those years ago during the Chunin exams. A hateful, evil person Gaara had been at that time. Back then, the Sand Shinobi was someone who had absolutely no regard for anyone but himself, killing all of those who stood in his path, his blood-reeking sand a weapon that did his bidding. To hear him now, admiring his teammates and caring for their well-being, made Sasuke realize that he himself was closer to how Gaara used to be than Gaara himself was now. It gave Sasuke hope of how far a person could change even after spending so long filled with hate. Sasuke stood then, bowed, and said, I intend to value those closest to me once more. Thank you for honoring my request. Those blue eyes met him with a calm stare. The Kazekage stood as well, coming from around the table to stand in front of him. I am glad, Sasuke, that you have found something worth returning from the darkness. I have always had faith that Naruto, at least, might be able to show you the light again. Sasuke withheld the emotion that he was feeling from his face. He turned toward the door and Sasuke made to follow. Gaara's voice echoed back to him over his shoulder. It will be difficult to overcome what others think of you, but only you can change the path ahead of you and make a future for yourself as the person you truly want to be. As the Kazekage opened the door for him, he turned towards Sasuke once more with his wisdom. I hope you will always remember that we cannot suffer pain alone. Like love and joy, it has to be shared with others. It is those bonds with others that makes us stronger. Sasuke had wanted to retreat directly into the desert environment like he had planned. He had even stopped at a couple of small shops built into the side of an adobe building for some element-specific items, a set of weather-resistant clothes and accessories which included a turban and new boots. Tossing his remaining coin in his palm, Sasuke decided at the last minute to purchase a smaller pair of beige trousers and a modest white tunic which seemed to be her size. He had picked them up, scrutinized them carefully, set them back down and had almost walked away. Then, he almost asked for his money back as soon as he procured them. Sasuke couldn't wait to depart much longer, it just wasn't in him to put his mission off any longer. He felt rejuvenated enough to leave at this very second, which of course, had him guiltily remembering the person who was responsible for this new energy. Sakura had been tired just before they had arrived and had been sent immediately to the hospital to continue working. For all he knew, she was probably still dead on her feet. So he was going to make a brief stop before he headed out. Swinging the small knapsack of fresh belongings over his shoulder, Sasuke easily located the building that announced, "Doctor," in bright red kanji and reached the building quickly. When he arrived, he was admitted by a medic ninja dressed in a white gown. There was another man behind a small desk in the foyer that wore red medic attire. When inquiring about his pink-haired teammate, the healers' wary expressions lightened considerably at the mention of Sakura. Sasuke realized that they held her in the highest regard and welcomed anyone associated with her, even an ex-criminal. She is not on this floor, they informed him, pointing to a stairwell at the end of a narrow green hallway. She's currently with an herbalist at the greenhouse. You can follow those steps down. As Sasuke passed the numbered patient rooms, he was relieved to see that they were unoccupied. This must have meant that they weren't busy and didn't require Sakura to exhaust herself too much after all. He caught his train of thinking and reasoned with himself that he owed it to her since he was running off of her reserves after all. When he made it to the bottom of the stairs, Sasuke stepped out into a lush green garden surrounded by a sand wall that served as a small courtyard off the back of the hospital. In its center, towered a glass house that reflected the hot desert sun off its surface. The small space reminded him instantly of the leaf. Sasuke's ears automatically picked up on the clear silvery tone of Sakura's voice coming from inside the shining structure. There was a response of laughter after she spoke and Sasuke almost turned around when Kankuro stepped out of the door and caught him lurking. Shutting the door behind him, Kankuro made his way towards the Uchiha with his hands in his pockets. If Sasuke wasn't with one less arm and not gripping the bag in his only hand, the Uchiha would have crossed his arms to go along with the scowl he was currently displaying for him. Sasuke, Kankuro greeted kindly enough, ignoring Sasuke's aloof disposition. Are you looking for Sakura? I can tell her you need her for a sec if. No, Sasuke immediately reacted, tightly gripping the sack and securing it on his shoulder. He had just lost his nerve completely. I am heading out. Tell her I left. He made a turn, but Kankuro suddenly asked, will you be back late? I can show you your room first, so you know where to go when you come back. If Kankuro had phrased the last part like a question, Sasuke would have simply said, no, or, get lost, or whatever. But he didn't, and Sasuke followed the puppet master back up the stairs. When another high-pitched, but happy, exclamation echoed up the stairwell from the greenhouse, Sasuke couldn't help his next angled statement. Sakura can be like a child and overdo it. Has she completely exhausted herself yet? Kankuro laughed in agreement. She seems fine right now, but I'll make sure she doesn't drain herself too much. This way. Good enough for Sasuke. As long as someone was looking out for her, it didn't have to be him, he supposed. Walking to the next building over, Sasuke realized that their lodgings were conveniently close to the hospital. That was reassuring at least, knowing Gaara was going out of his way to accommodate his female counterpart. The walk was awkwardly silent until Kankuro spoke finally. I am grateful to her, you know, he admitted. Sakura saved my life when the Akatsuki came for Gaara. Surprised by this, Sasuke recalled what the Kazekage had said about Sakura. We are talking about the Kunoichi who helped save my life, my brothers, and helped defeat Sasori when Kankuro could not. That statement suddenly made a lot more sense after Kankuro continued to explain. Sasori poisoned me when I pursued them after the attack on our village. It was an unrecognizable poison at the time, but Sakura showed up and was able to develop an antidote for me. After having pulled the poison directly from my organs, that is. The ninja shuddered as he walked. Damn painful that was, too. Sasuke didn't answer with anything more than an acknowledging, "HN." Of course she did, he thought to himself. Sasuke also remembered the details of the conversation he had had with her on the way here. She had told him about the battle with Sasori and had mentioned an antidote she had used on herself after having taken in the poison herself. Sakura hadn't mentioned how she had created the antidote or what situation other than the battle had required it. Kankuro was lucky she had been the ninja to come. Kankuro left Sasuke with an elderly hostess who was in charge of the small hospital side inn. She was older and very kind as she led Sasuke to the top story of the building. Once there, she opened the door of the room at the end of the hallway. It seemed as if there was no one else staying here, and Sasuke had another revelation that it was the largest and most secluded apartment the inn had to offer. With a sigh, Sasuke finally understood that this was one of the Kazecage's precautions to keep him away from other people. He bit back his annoyance. Let him clear the inn. Sasuke didn't care. He hated people anyway. Sasuke realized his mistake as soon as he entered the chamber and stumbled upon two beds a few feet away from one another. It wasn't a secluded room, it was a private room. Sasuke almost choked, turning promptly to the woman who ushered him in obliviously. He stuttered. There are two. Seeing the expression on his face, the woman backtracked with a countenance of horror. I am so sorry. The Kazekage did not specify that you wanted a separate space from your fellow ninja. Gaara must have not mentioned that this particular ninja was a female. He wanted to say so, but decided against it. He recalled their last incident back at the hotel they had stayed out beforehand. Sasuke's excuse at the time had been that they should stay together in enemy territory. Even if Sunagakure wasn't enemy territory, it was still not the Leaf. No, he assured the woman who was bustling with nerves, afraid she had erred and insulted him. It is fine, thank you. After she left, Sasuke looked down at the two green quilted beds, one flush against the wall directly under the large window and the other only a few feet away to the left, despite the room's immense space. Making up his mind, he scooted the leftmost bed towards the opposite side of the room and placed it against the wall closest to the door. He laid his new belongings on top of it, claiming it as his. If anyone was entering and exiting, it would be under his supervision. He stripped off his travel-worn attire, washed quickly, and adorned himself with the freshly purchased clothes. He tossed a heavier, woven poncho over his shoulder for when the desert darkened and took on a different temperature altogether. Taking the black turban, he wrapped it tightly around the black mane of his hair, almost identical to the style he had worn it only a year ago. Sasuke folded his dirty clothes and placed them on the floor at the foot of his bed along with the open-toe ninja sandals that Sasuke had replaced with boots. He fingered the other set of clothing that he had obtained and decided to fold them neatly as well, setting them carefully on the window side bed. Yes, he had bought them for Sakura and hadn't been able to give them to her directly once he had interacted with Kankuro. Coming back to civilization might be starting to clear his head of such personal notions. With any luck, she would assume it was being provided to her as a part of Gaara's hospitality. As he placed them on her pillow, Sasuke noticed a bright silver tray filled with refreshments on a small shelf in the center of the flat. He retrieved it and sat it on her bed as well, straight below the clothes, hoping she would take the hint to eat something. Feeling certain of her well-being, Sasuke did what he did best. He made his way out of the village and disappeared into the wilderness. When Sakura Haruno had been dismissed from the Kage's council room, she had immediately followed Kankuro to the Sunagaku Hospital on the east side of the village. They had not been busy, but when Sakura had been kindly announced, the staff smiled in recognition and escorted her straight to the children's hospital at her request. Sakura saw several patients, but none of them had bodily injuries or illnesses to attend to. In their cases, it was their minds and mental well-being that Sakura was assessing. When meeting their first patient, a child named Isao, the head medics insisted on observing her interactions with the child despite the fact that she had modeled this process for them before. It was the first time Kunoichi had sat down with a child since the incident with her patient, Amiko, back in Konoha. It was still a fresh wound for Sakura, but because of that, she took her time examining the child in front of her. "What's your name?" she asked him, pulling up and reviewing his chart which listed the child's background, symptoms of behavior, as well as his trauma record. There was only one pattern of concerning behavior: frequent night terror episodes. The trauma, the only thing listed was the death of the child's mother. The child mumbled his name shyly in response, ducking his head, to which Sakura tried to give him a reassuring smile. Sakura quickly identified all that had been done to rule out any physical ailments or causes that might be the source of the night terrors. A sleep study had been conducted in which heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing had been monitored. After a few more dead ends, the referral information said that the determining factor might be stress. His mother's death was 2 years ago, during the Shinobi World War, in fact. Was the child still experiencing stress from her death or was it something more than that? Sakura would have to conduct a formal interview with him in order to figure out what exactly might be the stressor in this child's life. Sakura began to ask him questions about his life, how old he was, how he was doing at school, who he lived with, where he lived. What she learned from these types of questions was that Isao was an 11-year-old boy who lived with his father and seemed to be a fairly happy child despite his mother's passing. He was one of the top students in his class, had a close group of friends, and lived in a household with considerable means. Sakura switched to the more specific questions in regard to his condition. "Isao," Sakura smiled again at the young boy, "do you have any dreams during your night terrors?" Isao looked up towards his hairline in thought for a quick second, but then returned her questions with a confident and mature, "Not that I recall." Sakura recorded what she could and sent the child home with a promise to see him the following day. After he departed, Sakura turned to the head medic, a man named Mako that Sakura had worked closely with before, who had remained standing close by and said, "I need to speak to the physician who referred him. There has to be more to this that I can use." "Right away, miss," Mako responded, leaving to retrieve the physician. After repeating the process with a few other children, Mako informed her that the most recent adolescent would be the last of their patients for a while. Sakura was then escorted to the greenhouse that she had once visited before so that she could find some helpful herbs for Isao to help him sleep. She also wanted to do a quick session for Mako and his team about what she was discovering with chakra-applied medicine. When arriving, she quickly came up with a draft for Isao and recreated the burn solvent that she had invented in the leaf to treat the burn victims of Chino's human bombs. Sakura had always been fascinated with how well the Sunagaku Hospital was able to recreate an environment such as the greenhouse for most medicinal plants that weren't native to the land. As she wrote down the ingredients for both medicines, Kankuro walked in with a casual wave. Came by to check on you. I just finished preparing your rooms. I'll show you where they are as soon as you are finished up here. Thank you, Kankuro. She smiled politely. I think I'll be here for quite some time still and I don't want you to have to wait up. Offering him the same pen she used to write down the burn solvent's ingredients, Kankuro drew her a quick little map on the back of her paper. It's just to the right of the hospital. Take a right here at the corner and it's the little inn next to it. The manager's name is Chi, she'll take care of you. She bowed to him, holding the piece of paper gratefully. Thanks again. I'll be off now, but I'll come again before the night is over. Let us know if you need anything else. She assured him she'd see him later and suddenly felt bad that he felt like he needed to babysit her. She knew that he was just being a good host, much like Shikamaru did for Tamari when she had stayed in the Leaf Village at one point, but Sakura still felt it was unnecessary. After Kankuro's departure, Meiko had quickly returned everyone to the subject at hand by exchanging a brief joke in regard to chakra-applied medicine. Catching the very end of it, Sakura explained, with this medicine, maybe sunburns won't be so much of an issue here. She laughed along with the others and her insecurities left as Kankuro walked out the door. Kankuro was true to his word and checked on her once more before the sun began to fall beneath the walls of Sunagaku. She waited until dark to make the small trek to her quarters and once again made sure that no one was following her before she entered the inn. Sakura could hear Sasuke's disapproving cluck already if someone else happened to make an appearance in the middle of the night because of her carelessness. Welcome, the elderly innkeeper announced, quickly meeting her at the door. I am so sorry, dear, but all of our rooms are full. Oh, the pink-haired ninja exclaimed embarrassingly. There must have been some sort of mistake then. You're not Chi. I must have the wrong inn, she told the woman, rubbing the back of her head as she looked down at the little hand-drawn map in her hands. Can you help me find the correct one? Lord Gaara. The cage, the woman exclaimed, rushing forward and pulling the map from her hands. After a minute of observing it more closely, the innkeeper cocked her head in second thought. What is your name, miss? Feeling slightly awkward, Sakura smiled as politely as she could. Why was it that she was experiencing moments like this frequently at hotels? Haruno, Sakura, she answered plainly, almost telling the woman to forget it altogether, instead. But the name sparked recognition in the woman's face, and her eyes grew wide as she began to apologize for her confusion. Yes, this way, ma'am, she gestured for Sakura to follow. The situation was explained to her as they walked, all while the woman wrung her hands nervously. I only have one room for you and your teammate. He insisted that it was fine, but I would be more than happy to arrange for you to have another room, miss. Hadn't the lady just said that all the rooms were full? Sakura paused as she processed slowly what this woman was saying. She was explaining that there was only one room for the both of them. Her and Sasuke were going to be sharing a room. And he had said that it was fine. Sakura's inner self was both screaming and panicking. Sure enough, the lady spoke true and Sakura arrived at the end of the very long hallway on the top floor, and surveyed the single, unoccupied, spacious room with 2 beds. Again, I am so sorry for my mistake, the woman bowed, and Sakura waved her hands in polite dismissal. After Chi left, Sakura shut the door and placed her back against it with an exhale. She wasn't so sure if she shouldn't follow the woman and ask for a separate room after all. What was Kankuro thinking about giving them the same room? And then Sasuke agreeing to it? Sure, they had stayed together back in Tanagaku, but that was because there were strange ninja after them. Maybe that's why Sasuke agreed to this, maybe he thought this was still considered enemy territory. Sakura laughed a little when she saw how far away Sasuke had separated the two beds from one another. She could still see the outline of where it had been hours before, just a few feet away from the companion bed. She only recognized it as Sasuke's because his clothing was neatly folded and put to the side of it. The lack of his shirtless self wandering the room's corridors let Sakura know that he was currently out. Walking to the opposite side of the dim room, Sakura glanced down at her own bed, which was currently occupied by a tray of food and fresh clothes. In response, her stomach growled, and she quickly removed the tray, snagging a few Sunagaku's famous biscuits from it. Sakura was even more excited about the new set of clean clothes. When she and Sasuke had fallen through the time-space dimension after they were attacked, Sakura had left behind her small bag of belongings. This meant the only things she currently possessed were the dirty clothes on her back. She quickly washed and changed into them. The beige trousers were exactly her size and fit her like a glove down to her ankles. She was amazed at how great of a guess the staff must have made in order to find them. The simple white tunic fit her a little looser, draped low with sleeves that fell just above her elbows. Sakura tucked the front of the shirt into her pants to give herself more shape and smiled at this version of herself dressed in Sunagaku fashion. Although she preferred her own style of red and white, Sakura thought this was a decent change. To finish the look, Sakura tested out braiding back her damp hair to keep the Sand Village winds from tearing at it. She quickly untangled it once she was sure she had the process of the play in memory. Sakura sat cross-legged on her bed, half tempted but far too shy to pull Sasuke's bed back over to its original spot and blame it on Chi. She'd give him the distance he so obviously wanted even if it went against her own heart's desires. Even when Sasuke was with her, sometimes it seemed he was still very far away. After several late-night hours of watching the starry sky out the window beside her bed, Sakura realized suddenly that she was waiting on Sasuke to return. And at this very same moment, Sakura made a heartbreaking connection. His clothes had been left behind because Sasuke had left to continue his mission in the desert. Sasuke hadn't cared if they shared a room because he hadn't planned on staying in it. Sakura recalled her words to Sasuke when she had confronted him back in Konoha about accompanying him on his journey. I'm a Jonin, now. I have my own mission to fulfill along the way. And then she also remembered what she had said to Gaara earlier that morning when he asked about her separate mission. I am hoping to check in on Sunagaku's own mental health clinic, as well as share some of my own medical findings with your hospital's doctors, if I may. I would also like to assist in any way medically during our time here. Yes, she had made it clear to both Sasuke and Gaara about having separate missions, but having separate missions didn't mean that Sakura wanted to be, well, separated. Sakura reasoned with herself that this was impractical of her. How else was it supposed to work? But she still felt frustrated. Shouldn't he have at least come and told her he was leaving? Couldn't Sasuke have mentioned when he'd be back, so she wasn't waiting on him? Maybe that had always been her problem. She fell asleep to the memory of her apartment, the smell of tea, and his monotone voice telling her, I want you to stop waiting for me, Sakura. Sasuke stood ankle deep in sand and focused on his breathing. It was evening now, and the setting, burning sun was a halo of orange fire against his shadowy figure. He breathed in the heat. Inhaled. Exhaled. Once. Twice. And then again. In his mind's eye, Sasuke pictured Kagaya's desert dimension and pretended he was inhaling the heat there instead. This would be Sasuke's first attempt to teleport to any dimension directly without going through the core dimension where he had taken Sakura. It was connected to all of the other dimensions and was the bridge to all of them. But this had been Sasuke's goal for some time. to bypass the core dimension altogether and cut his chakra use in half and decrease the time he spent there recovering afterwards. Summoning the chakra to his Rinnegan, Sasuke exhaled the heat in his lungs as he opened the black rift before him. Pain instantly began in his temples as he reached forward with his chakra to push beyond the core dimension. He searched for the familiar desert, feeding the dojutsu more chakra in hopes of reaching it. More. It needed more, and he grudgingly gave it. Come on, he growled internally, reaching deep into his reserves. Just then, an image of white sand appeared on the other side of the spinning portal and Sasuke immediately lunged for it. The Uchiha dove and the hot air around him abruptly vanished as pain pulsed like lightning in the back of his skull and behind his Rinnegan. Sasuke dropped to his knees at the sudden loss of chakra that evaporated from him. He knelt in the red dirt of the core dimension and felt the sensation of a vacuum as he lost hold of the sand dimension. Damn it! He cursed and slammed his fist into the ground as a memorable weakness came over him. He knelt his forehead into the soil and let go of the jutsu altogether. He focused on his breathing once more, this time just trying to get as much oxygen as this cursed, airless dimension would allow him to have. Sasuke had been so close to reaching it, but just couldn't supply enough chakra. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to amass the cost it would take in energy to do what Kagaya had been able to do so easily. Sasuke knew he shouldn't be disappointed since this was his first try at it. And besides, he had helped defeat the Mother of Chakra. If anyone could copy Kagaya's travel between dimensions, it would be him. Sasuke had to because the village depended on him to do so, he had to keep the future bright. Sasuke frowned when he suddenly realized that he didn't have enough chakra left to return to his own dimension. He had used up too much trying to stretch the jutsu. He had thought this would happen, had even anticipated it and accepted it. But as Sasuke rolled onto his back and breathed heavily, looking towards where the portal had been milliseconds before, he felt disheartened. He wouldn't be going back to Suna to find Sakura tonight, then. Sasuke would have to recover here for a night or two before he could go back. Despite having a talk with himself about Sakura's well-being on his journey here, Sasuke contemplated it again now. She would be fine. His pink-haired teammate was more than capable of taking care of herself, she didn't have to prove that to him anymore. Besides, Kankuro was looking out for her if not Gaara. She was busy with her own duties anyway. As long as she rested, she would be fine. Sasuke closed his eyes and let the sand-filled air brush against his face. She would be fine. Sakura was not fine for several reasons. The first was that she had been running off of only a few hours of sleep. How was she supposed to get any of the rest she needed if Kunoichi spent the night wondering about Sasuke? Sakura had tossed half the night in anger and the other half in worry. She knew that Sasuke lived in this exact same situation for 2 years without her worrying about him. Maybe it had been the encounter with the ninja back in Tanagakure that still had Sakura's nerves on edge. The two of them hadn't met their pursuers since, but Sakura was still concerned about the confrontation and had never discovered the motive behind their attack. The identities of the ninja still remained a mystery as well. Her major concern was the fact that they had meant to do Sasuke harm first by breaching his room while the Uchiha had been asleep in hers. They came to hers next, Sakura rationalized, only because Sasuke had been absent. Were they really after Sasuke, or was the entire occurrence completely random because they were Foreign Leaf Shinobi? If they were after Sasuke, how long would it take for them to track him down while he was alone in the desert, away from the village and away from her? These were the thoughts that resurfaced in Sakura's mind all night, and she only managed a little sleep because she ended up reminding herself that Sasuke was one of the strongest ninja in the world, and that if anyone was after him, he would easily handle the situation and deal with the enemy on his own. The second reason why Sakura was not fine was because they were unable to locate her patient, Isao. After his first appointment with her, Sakura had developed a medicine that would help Isao sleep more soundly throughout the night to help with his night terrors. When his appointment time came first thing in the morning, he didn't show. One of the staff members had walked down to his father's house and had not found anyone home. It was evening now, and Isao had still not made an appearance. Sakura finally settled with writing Isao's father a note explaining her wish to see the boy and having the same staff member take it and leave it at their house. Despite not seeing Isao, Sakura's schedule was full. Everyone in the village expressed a desire to be seen by the pink-haired medic, either because they believed in her advanced abilities or because they wanted to be included in the rare event. Sakura used their curiosity against them and was able to quickly give them a full exam as well as create detailed medical records for the majority of Sunagaku's citizens. When Kankuro came to check on her, Sakura embarrassingly assured him that she was more than fine despite the workload. She was in the middle of organizing these records when Kankuro reminded her to make time to see the sunset while she was here. She had briefly mentioned it to him when they had first arrived, and it seemed he still remembered their conversation. "Oh," she exclaimed. "Yes, I was able to catch glimpses of it yesterday. I imagine I'll have some time left to do so once I've finished up here." Kankuro nodded in response and said, "You are doing so much here. Take time for yourself, too." "Oh, I will," she promised again as he exited the building, wondering why he was emphasizing this point to her. Sakura had too much on her plate tonight, such as finish the records, go over what new information she learned from Isao's referral, as well as check on the patients that stayed overnight at the children's medic clinic. She even considered staying with them overnight since she assumed Sasuke wouldn't be back anytime soon. She honestly didn't know how long her teammate would be away. A couple of days, weeks. She prayed it wasn't so. Sakura raised her chin and faced her work confidently. If she had any hope whatsoever of one day loving this man and having him love her in return, then she had better get used to this. Sasuke Uchiha would return eventually. When Sakura spotted Isao slouching tiredly in an olive chair across from the welcoming desk, she almost stumbled in her happiness. Across the room, she offered the boy a friendly expression as he met her direct gaze and he blushed shyly and looked away from her and down at his feet. When she announced his name to come back, the boy nervously rubbed his wrists as he stood and then placed his hands behind his back in a manner of such mature politeness that had Sakura smiling widely at him. As they walked to the exam room, Isao continued rubbing at his wrists and Sakura frowned at the behavior because it was the first time she was seeing him do so. "Is everything okay, Isao?" Sakura asked, wondering why he was suddenly exhibiting nervousness in her presence. Just like today, Isao had been weary when she saw him last, but this time, his tiredness didn't hide the anxiety. "Yes, ma'am," he responded after a second's hesitation. Sakura had the gut-wrenching feeling that everything was not okay. When they entered the assigned room, Mako was waiting for them with the child's chart. Sakura assumed this meant he wanted to be present for the child's examination. After checking vitals, she wasted no time before diving into the assessment. The child was half asleep by the time she finished checking his blood pressure and Isao snapped awake when she spoke. "We missed you yesterday, but I am glad that you could make it today." To Sakura's disappointment, Isao only nodded and did not offer up any more information, so Sakura tried a different question. "How have you slept the past couple of nights?" Isao yawned ironically before saying, "Not good. I've had an episode each night." The boy looked away from Sakura then, embarrassed, as if admitting this truth to her was shameful in some way. Sakura looked more closely at his facial features, noting the dark circles under his eyes. It wasn't just that he was waking up in the middle of the night. From the looks of those dark eyes and his exhausted state, it seemed he was staying awake throughout the night. Sakura wanted to immediately send him home to get more rest, but she was afraid that if she did so, she might not get him back to the clinic again. The child was practically falling asleep in the chair across from her, and when she asked questions, he'd rub his wrists nervously. She noted how they were starting to chafe now but had been untouched during his last visit. This was a new behavior, which told Sakura that there was a new variable to this sleepless situation. Isao? Sakura asked, casually writing this observation down on a clipboard on the counter beside her. It says on your record that you had a sleep study done with us. Who did this study? I did, he replied immediately, or, well, my dad did after we were shown how. Sakura couldn't help but look over at Mako, who narrowed his eyes too at the child's words. Isao's primary care physician hadn't told them that the sleep study was self-performed. When Mako had finally found Isao's doctor, the man said that stress had been the deciding factor because the sleep study had ruled out other medical factors. Sleep studies were sometimes done this way, but in this particular case, Sakura believed that it was necessary for her to complete another. Maybe removing him from his home for a night would help the child sleep anyway. Isao, she began, already making up her mind about the situation. Would you like to stay here for the night? We need to do another sleep study in this facility with our doctors. The child's eyes widened, and he gawked at her as if she had just requested him to commit murder. He stumbled over his words as sweat began to bead on his forehead. I don't, think so, he stuttered. I don't think that would be good. My dad, he began, but then stopped himself instantly. After a minute of not receiving anything else from him except shaking, Sakura made eye contact with Mako, silently communicating to him her wishes. Sakura wouldn't force Isao to stay, but she wanted to emphasize the importance of the suggestion. But if Isao was displaying such nervous behavior around her, then perhaps this negative response to the idea was because of her too. She was a foreign ninja after all, maybe there was mistrust there. Isao did mention something about his father. Maybe if Sakura stepped out of the room for a moment, Mako could help him understand. As if reading her thoughts, Mako nodded and Sakura stood to leave. I'll be right back, she spoke softly. I'll give you a few minutes to decide while Mako-san finishes up your chart. Again, Isao bowed without a word. He only continued to rub his wrists and tap his foot. Sakura frowned to herself and exited. Dot 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 dot. A message had been sent to Isao's absent father after Mako was able to convince Isao that an overnight stay was in his best interest. Mako had informed her that the child had been anxious at first for unknown reasons, but Mako had explained to the adolescent that Isao would barely see them during the night. They just wanted to recheck his heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing while he slept. When ensured with a good night's sleep, the child finally conceded. Sakura had Mako write down everything during the conversation, so she could look at it on her own later. The child was definitely stressed, but Sakura couldn't yet pinpoint why. Maybe these notes would help her put some puzzle pieces together. In the meantime, she prepared a room for Isao in the children's clinic. Sakura had helped pick the design for these rooms. She had explained to Gaara and the other head medics that it would be best to have quarters that didn't look like the exam rooms in the hospital. Children were often afraid of hospitals, so Sakura described that these apartments should be made to look like common Sunagaku living spaces that these children were used to seeing frequently. It was always best to help kids feel like they weren't in a medical facility. When the decision was unanimously in favor of this idea, Gaara had ordered it to be so and had toys and bookshelves brought in. They decorated these rooms as calmly as they were able. Flowers in a large windowsill, white curtains and matching bedspread, a Sunagaku rope rug on the floor, and small pastel paintings of the village on the walls. Besides the newly invented machinery in the corner needed for medical purposes, the rooms were relaxing and varied slightly depending on age. Isao's room, one of the bedchambers for young adolescents, had books with legends and entertaining stories instead of small toys. Even in the leaf, Sakura wanted the spaces to be free from historical documents or anything else that might trigger an emotional disturbance due to the warring past. Sakura wanted children to feel like regular kids when they were here, because most of the time, it was the shinobi life that was affecting them in some way. Sakura believed this might be true for Isao as well. The child of 11 was beginning to pursue being a ninja here in Sunagaku. Maybe it was this change that was causing Isao anxiety. If his mother had died in the war, maybe he associated her death with the ninja way of life, perhaps his father pushed him toward this goal. This was all speculation, of course, but Sakura didn't have much to go on here. She hoped she'd learn more during Isao's stay. Mako had escorted Isao to his room and told him to make himself at home. When Sakura had brought him dinner, the nervous behavior began again, so she set the tray down and departed quickly with a kind smile. "He's cautious of me, I think," she told Mako after making her way down the 2 stories of stairs and back into the reception lobby. Mako looked up from his work at the tall, ivory counter with an expression of worry. "No, miss, I'm sure it's just nerves." Sakura leaned over the counter next to him and reached for a small jug of water that had been given to her at the beginning of the day. She took a long drink of refreshing water before replying dejectedly, "He only displays that jumpy behavior when I'm near." Mako started to shake his head, but Sakura waved a hand in dismissal. She knew Mako was just trying to reassure her. The entire staff treated her as if she were a miracle worker, and Mako didn't want her upset while she was working with them. Perhaps he was afraid that she might not return again after she departed Sunagaku, or maybe it was because she was a guest of the Cages. Or, she thought again, he just genuinely liked her and didn't want her to feel out of place here. "I have a suspicion that it might be because I'm not from this village," she announced, tapping her fingers on the counter in thought. "Do we know anything about his family? Their sentiments towards other villages or outsiders? Anything about his mom?" "I will look into it immediately, miss," Mako replied, and then with a comforting beam, announced, "I am certain that the boy will warm up to you soon." Sakura wanted to tell him he wasn't being much help while trying to spare her feelings, but she only grinned back in return as he worked. This was day 3 in Sunagaku, and Sakura's routine was still rather busy. After dinner, Isao sat up in bed trying to read a book despite how tired he was. Mako stopped by in the hours between sunset and nightfall, making sure the machinery was functioning properly in preparation for his sleep. From what Sakura was witnessing in the brief check-ins she was conducting on the youth, he appeared to be much like a toddler that was fighting sleep. Sakura sent Mako in before 7 o'clock with some hot tea that Sakura hoped would soothe the boy. He wouldn't drink it, but the pink-haired medic refused to try the sleeping concoction she had made for Isao. She didn't want to try anything new until after the study was completed. Using it now would hurt their efforts instead of helping, because they needed to observe his typical sleep habits, however bad they may be. While Sakura waited for Isao to fall asleep, she worked with the machine expert to monitor the data that was being sent to a very large box that took up an entire wall in the observation room. The device was printing out various numbers on ivory pieces of paper that the machine was spitting at her feet. All these numbers were telling Sakura what she needed to know about Isao's sleep, such as his sleep stages, body and eye movements, oxygen levels, and breathing rate. Mako was by her side throughout the entire process and collected and organized the papers for her while she evaluated some new information Mako had gathered for her. Mako had investigated Isao's family through sources in the village, and Sakura went over his handwritten notes after he had explained them to her. Both Isao's father and mother, Takuro Sota and Takuro Rina, were shinobi in the last war. Sota, Isao's father, had been injured during the war but had made a recovery. Rina, on the other hand, had been one of the many that had lost their lives in the war. Sakura racked her brain desperately for any recognition of the name. If the Sand Kunoichi had been sent to Sakura in the war to be healed, wouldn't Sakura have seen her? Or for that matter, if Sota had been healed, perhaps Sakura had treated him in the war. Both of the names were unfamiliar to her. Sakura had helped thousands of patients in the war. The longer that Isao fought his sleep, the more concerned Sakura became. It was almost like he was afraid to sleep, didn't want to sleep. Maybe he had lied to her about dreaming during the night terrors. Perhaps he did in fact have nightmares that he didn't want to face. Nightmares of his mother. Something else. Sakura decided that the child needed to be reassured considering that he might be fearful, and so she made the two-story climb and knocked lightly on his door. Mako had insisted on coming with her, but she asked him to stay behind to evaluate any data her interaction with him might reveal. Isao, she called softly, do you mind if I come in? No ma'am, please come in. Sakura recognized the hitch in his voice and resolved herself to be patient and kind to this confused child who treated her with such uneasiness. Isao, she began, pouring him a cup of tea from the kettle that he had yet to touch, we cannot help you if you refuse to sleep. Why are you frightened? Without a second of hesitation, the child asked, is my dad here? No, she responded calmly despite being taken aback by this question. He is not. Does he know that I am here? He asked immediately after her response. Sakura couldn't help but tilt her head at his concern and answer honestly, we sent him a notice that said you were going to stay with us tonight. He hasn't responded. Isao began rubbing his wrists again, and whispered, he won't like that I am here. What do you mean? Sakura inquired quickly, worried that he might shut down at any moment. He won't like that I am in a hospital. It means that I am being weak. Sakura's motherly instinct kicked in at this confession, and she couldn't help but reach towards him. She felt foolish the moment she did so, because Isao pulled back from her in terror and flinched as if she might do him harm. Raising her hands in front of her in apology, Sakura did something that she recurrently did in circumstances like this. Instead of leaning towards him in a chair, she adopted a spot on the floor, a tactic to make her appear less threatening and more humble. Frequently, when people are anxious, having someone stand over them or talk down to them, even if that person is being humane, causes more involuntary stress for the individual. It was a basic, inherent instinct that many people weren't even aware was in play. Touching or any sort of physical contact would also not work for comfort. When Sakura witnessed children have negative reactions to certain behaviors, it was often safe to conclude that they were reacting negatively because they were recognizing the pattern of behavior that led up to the treatment they were often used to receiving. Sakura realized that Isao must have often dealt with someone of authority standing over him and possibly engaging in bodily contact. This meant that in order to reach him, Sakura would have to do the exact opposite of that. She crossed her legs, leaned her back against the side of his bed, and broke eye contact. She yawned and took a drink from the glass of tea that she had offered to him. She could feel the shock radiating off of Isao at her unusual behavior, and so she decided to address his confession and wait for him to make the first moves of opening up. You know Isao, Sakura began, taking another calming sip of tea, there are many sicknesses. Sicknesses of the body and many sicknesses of the psyche, or a person's mind. And it certainly doesn't mean that you are weak. Really? He murmured tiredly in question at the back of her head. Actually, it means the opposite, she continued, it means that life has dealt you something that others do not have to struggle with and that battle makes you stronger. You are having to fight every day against something that many people are free of. There was a small silence before Sakura recognized the clinking of the teapot behind her. Sakura smiled as she heard Isao finally reached for the kettle at his bedside and poured himself a cup of the steaming liquid. He reached over her shoulder for her cup too, refilling it to the brim before handing it back to her. When he readjusted himself on the bed, Isao sat with his back against the headboard and admitted, you remind me of my mom. Before she died, she was compassionate like you. And knew a lot about things. Sakura briefly made eye contact again, just long enough to show him her sympathy, and then looked back into her tea as she replied to that statement with, I am sorry that your mother died in the war. She must have been a very brave woman. She was, he confirmed after taking a very long drink of tea and leaning his head back against the headboard. Sakura took her chance to say something else before the effects of the tea took its course on his body. He was so very tired, and it wouldn't take much of the hot beverage to lull him into a doze. Just like sicknesses of the body, she began, sicknesses of the mind are sometimes caused by something. Our bodies fight against viruses, against things that it has been exposed to. In her peripheral vision to her right, Sakura could see him nod in understanding. She continued, "We want to help you, Isao. But to beat a sickness, we have to figure out what it was caused by." Sakura paused, but there was no answer. She kept her head down as she asked calmly, "Do you know what's making you have these terrors? What is making you sick, Isao?" She waited a long minute, a very long minute. Sakura almost thought that the boy had fallen asleep. When the kunoichi rotated her back to look at him, she realized that she was mistaken. There were silent tears sinking down his cheeks and a few of them dribbled into his half-empty cup. Through his shaking sobs, the boy choked out the words, "My father." Sakura was able to get the rest of the information out of Isao before he slipped weepily into slumber. The child hadn't rested in 2 days. His father had punished Isao for going to the hospital on his own for his night terrors by keeping him awake. Sota had articulated to Isao that if he really wanted to be cured, then he just wouldn't sleep at all and had forced the child to stand awake the previous 2 nights. It was why Isao hadn't arrived at his appointment yesterday, he hadn't wanted to make his father angrier. The child had changed his mind this morning, it seemed. Isao had also confessed to her that his father hated Leaf Shinobi. This particular detail explained why the 11-year-old had displayed concerning conduct when she was near. Before she parted from the room, Isao said, "My father believes that the last war was Konoha's fault. If the Kazekage hadn't been so close with the ninja called Naruto, then Sunagakure wouldn't have gotten involved and Lord Gaara wouldn't have played as big of a part as he did. He blames the leaf for mother's death." Everything was beginning to make sense to Sakura now. Everything except the night terrors themselves. If Isao believed that his father was making him sick, then in what way? Obviously, his father was the stressor in his life, but the unjust discipline that Isao received was after the night terrors began. Sakura supposed that it didn't really matter in regard to finding the cause, however, in order to develop a treatment, she would need more information. The last thing Isao confessed before slipping into sleep was that, when he finds out, my father will come to get me. He knows about you and that you are a leaf medic. You must not let him see you, miss, or my punishment will be worse. Over my dead body, Sakura thought to herself. She wanted to offer this man a piece of her damn mind. She wanted to give him a thrashing that he deserved for treating his son in such a beastly way. But Sakura had to remind herself that it wouldn't be uncommon for resentment to exist after the war, especially concerning lost loved ones. Oh, she'd be ready when he came. He would either have to talk to her, or fight her if he tried to penalize Isao for seeking medical attention. It was time for peace to begin for everyone, children and adults. Sakura had stayed up all night to conduct Isao's sleep study. The terror had happened early on and witnessing the episode broke Sakura's heart. There was no dreaming that occurred according to the data. The attack happened in NREM's sleep where dreaming did not occur. Isao had not been lying about not recalling dreams. Mako had insisted that they let the night terror run its course, so they could have the most complete data, but after 10 minutes of non-stop screaming and thrashing, Sakura concluded that it had been long enough for their purposes. When she finally woke him, Isao clung to her and sobbed afterwards, questioning her repeatedly, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me?" And Sakura had rocked him back and forth, whispering soothingly that nothing was wrong with him and she would figure this all out, she would make the terrors stop. Sakura realized after she positioned him back down on the bed and secured the blanket around him, that perhaps he was always punished for these episodes after they happened and never got any real sleep. Sakura decided to sit next to him on the floor for the rest of the night, holding his hand as he fell back asleep. The night terror didn't come back. When she woke the next morning before sunrise, Kankuro was crouching down in front of her grinning. Mako peered down at her too, standing just behind Kankuro's shoulder. Sakura realized that she must have fallen asleep here on the rug beside Isao's bed. The child's arm hung off the bed, his fingers brushing the rug where Sakura's own hand had been. They had held hands with each other and had let go at some point in the night as Sakura, too, had fallen asleep. Kankuro was whispering something to her, obviously not wanting to rouse Isao too. When he offered her his hand, Sakura took it appreciatively, allowing the puppet master to raise her onto her feet. When the door was closed behind them, Mako passed a mug of Sunagaku coffee to Kankuro, who in turn, fit it snugly in between Sakura's sleepy palms as if he had done so 1,000 times. You really do overdo it, don't you? Kankuro probed entertainingly, tossing her a laugh over his shoulder as they made their way down the stairs to the lobby. One of the female medics, a well-mannered young girl named Hisa that reminded Sakura of her own apprentice Kirai, fetched the kunoichi a chair. After she planted herself onto the stool with another yawn, she groggily explained to Kankuro what she had been up to recently and even articulated to him everything she had learned about Isao. This included the treatment he was receiving at home and his father's sentiments towards Konoha. Kankuro frowned, clearly forming a mental picture of the man described. The man you speak of was sent on a mission just yesterday, Kankuro informed her. I'll let the Cage know what you have found out about this situation. He might not be able to change that man's opinions about the leaf, but he certainly won't tolerate abuse. In the meantime, let's keep the boy here until his father returns. Yes, sir, Sakura promised him, somewhat hopeful for the boy's future. At least something would be done about this. Kankuro crossed his arms as he turned to lean his back against the counter beside her. I came to tell you that I am being dispatched on a mission of my own just outside of the village. I'll be gone for a couple of days and wanted to make sure that you would be okay here without an escort. Oh, Sakura started, I'll be fine. I'm in my element here. I can see that, he replied in kind, standing and making for the exit. We cannot tell you how thankful we are for the role you have played in our facilities. Sakura smiled in response but then scowled when Kankuro placed a hand on Mako's shoulder and proclaimed, I'm passing duty on to you. Make sure she rests please. Sakura wanted to say, hold on just a minute, but the words couldn't come out before Mako bowed with a, sir. And Kankuro left with a slight wave. Sakura spent the day checking on Isao. It seemed that the child needed to catch up on a lot of sleep apparently, because at noon, he was still out of it. Sakura didn't dare wake him. If he was in deep sleep, Sakura would not disturb that since the REM sleep cycle was free from terrors. Isao had been right about his father, because at around 4 o'clock, Sato made his intense appearance. Mako had been updating Isao's chart while Sakura demonstrated how to create gelatin capsules and pack them with herbs to create prescriptions that patients could take home. Sakura had packed 24 pods with powdered chamomile, valerian root, and magnesium, all of which would help Isao sleep and hopefully help the boy pass on to REM sleep more quickly. Maybe they could try it while Isao was staying at the clinic, so she could observe the medicine's direct effects for herself. Just as she finished labeling the prescription bottle, Sato slammed open the doors of the children's mental health clinic. Seeing Hisa first, Sato growled and made a beeline for her, shouting, "Where is my son?" Hisa, the youngest staff member of the clinic, gaped up at the man in astonishment as he bellowed down at her. Sakura had always been respectful and polite when talking to her elders and had wished that when she did finally encounter Sato, she would be able to receive the man with some civility. But witnessing him charge in with the same mannerisms she had been envisioning him using with Isao, made something in the kunoichi snap. Sakura was usually the calm and collected one in situations like this, but when it came to children, inner Sakura sometimes took the stage. Sensing this shift in attitude, Mako instinctively placed himself in front of Sakura, but Sakura scooted him out of her way and yelled back, "If you've got a problem, you take it up with me." When Sato revolved his head in her direction, a glower permanently stitched to his face, and stomped his way over to her, Sakura bared her teeth in response. What a bully! How could such a mature, kind-hearted child come from such a terrible person? Sakura tried to get a grip by reminding herself that this man too had been affected by the war. Maybe things had been different before the death of his wife. Maybe he used to be a loving father to his son and a caring husband to Rina. Or maybe not, Sakura thought as he came to stand over her, steam practically coming out of his nostrils and curling across the planes of her cheeks. Sakura squared her shoulders and glared back at him with equal venom, saying nothing with words but with body language alone. Sakura had faced giants, had defeated foe after foe in the Fourth Shinobi World War and had even stared into the eyes of Kaguya herself. She sure as hell wasn't afraid of him. Sakura would be damned if she let this man past her and up the stairs to where Isao slept. She noted suddenly how Mako and the other staff stood around them in a semicircle, unable to be anything but spectators as the two ninja narrowed their eyes at one another. Sakura wouldn't be harassed by him here. How could she ever expect Isao to stand up to this jerk, if she didn't model that now? Sir, she bit out between teeth, I suggest you have a seat, so we can talk. A big meaty finger jabbed her in the chest, hard enough to bruise, but Sakura didn't flinch. The fury and hatred in Sato's voice rang in her ears as he snarled, "I want my son back now, and I'm not going to talk to a Leaf Village bitch about it either." Sakura was tempted to break the man's fingers that dug sharply into her chest. She could feel the chakra vibrating beneath her skin in response to her own emotions, but she tried to stay level-headed. She really did, but her inner self was cursing in rage at this sort of disrespect. Thankfully, Sakura didn't have to teach him a lesson because someone else broke his fingers for her. Blinding sand abruptly encased the man's fingers that were jabbing into Sakura's collarbone. The crack was the sound that precluded Sato's blood-curdling scream at the sudden unexpected pain of his joints being popped out of place. The brute of a ninja fell to his knees in pain. Sakura spun to see Gaara, the cage dressed in all his regalia, standing in the entrance of the clinic, his voice unusually calm despite the wrath that flashed in his eyes. "Touch her again," he drawled in that raspy voice of his, "and you'll have more than your fingers to worry about." "Lord Cage," Sato hissed out through his pain. "This woman, she took my son." "From my report," Gaara interrupted collectedly, "your son came here on his own looking for medical attention." Sato regained himself and stood up straight despite still holding his injured hand. He started to say something, but the cage spoke again. "Sakura, Sunagaku's honored guest, was generous enough to treat your son personally and has gone above and beyond for him. The only thing you should be doing is thanking her." But Sato did not thank Sakura. He glared at her instead, a look of more malice than he had shown her a second ago. Sakura expected the refusal to enrage Gaara. It certainly would have made Naruto fuming mad. Naruto would have twisted his face up and pointed a finger at Sato's face with impractical threats. But like many Kage, Gaara was wise and had quickly checked his emotions, reigning with calm again in this situation. Sakura knew the type of Kage that Gaara was. He certainly wouldn't allow Sato to treat her with insult, that's what the broken fingers were for, but he didn't have to use fear to govern his people or keep them in order. Gaara had proven himself over and over again to the citizens of Sunagakure, and they loved him for his sacrifices and devotion. They also knew of his unmatched power and skill, and as a whole, respected him as their leader. Even though Isao had told her about Sato's particular feelings toward the Kazekage, Sato did not hesitate to obey when the Kazekage ordered, "Have a seat," like she asked, "Sato, we need to talk." Speaking with Sato was one of the most difficult things Sakura had ever done. Sato was angry at the world, angry at his Kazekage for involving their village in the war, angry at Konoha because of their relationship with Suna, angry at Sakura for not having been able to see his wife before she died and save her life. Everything Isao had told her about his father was true. Sato blamed everyone he could and detested his only child because of the constant memory he represented of Rina. The man's eyes had turned glassy once as he screamed and pointed a finger at the Kazekage, who remained emotionless. But then Isao walked down the stairs, already ducking his head and cringing at his father's voice. When Sato made eye contact with his son, the tears vanished, and he shot out of his seat and glared icily at the boy. "You," he began, but then Gaara stood, reminding Sato of his presence. The Kazekage decided that it would be best if Sato was removed from the children's mental health clinic. He was sent across the street to the hospital where Sakura felt like it would be beneficial for the man to be attended to. Sakura was starting to realize that maybe children weren't the only ones that benefited from a mental health clinic. How was there supposed to be hope for the next generation if the previous one passed on their grievance to their children? She expressed this concern to Gaara as they walked together towards the Sunagakure entrance. The Kazekage had received the news about Isao from Kankuro before his brother left, and when hearing that Sato had returned, Gaara knew he would most likely be seeking out the child. Gaara hadn't been a moment too late when he, too, decided to make a trip to the children's clinic. After reasoning with Sato, Gaara turned to Sakura and expressed his desire to take her to watch the sunset, something Kankuro had told him their guest had yet to do for herself. The Kazekage felt like the event would be a good respite for the both of them. Sakura contemplated his response for a minute as they strode down the main street towards the western exit of the village. The ninja of the last war fought for this dream, but when a few took account of their losses and sacrifices, some believed that very dream to be a lie now that they suffered personally from unhappiness. Sato was not the first that Sakura had encountered to feel this way, but he was the only person that Sakura knew of to be taking it out on his own child, which in turn, without help, might be damaged himself and angry later on. The steps that Sakura had already taken towards this epidemic were the right ones, but what more could she be doing now that she knew there was more to do? "It has been an inaccuracy," she agreed as Gaara peered over at her change in facial expressions, "to think that only children could suffer. What if we included adults in our mental health program too?" Gaara's eyes tightened a fraction in thought as he considered her words, so she added, "It would be harder, but maybe somebody could help these people." Without even a second of hesitation, the sand wielder commented, "Somebody likes Naruto." Naruto. Somebody like Naruto who could reach down into someone's soul and find the light there. Naruto, who had a permanent effect on everyone who he came in contact with. Naruto Uzumaki had been able to stir the hearts of Zabuza, Nagato, and Obito, inspiring them to fight for his dream. He was the ninja who never gave up on his friend and brought Sasuke back from the darkness. Even this very Kage, who walked casually beside her, had once been considered a demon before Naruto had gotten to him. "Like you, Lord Kazekage." Gaara's expression of shock was what made Sakura giggle. Gaara had not been expecting anyone to ever compare him to the ninja he admired most. He didn't say anything, so Sakura decided to elaborate as they finally reached the canyon opening at the back of the village. "You remind me of him a lot, actually. Whenever you lead us to war after your speech, I had thought at the time that not even Naruto could have inspired so many people at one time. You have a gift." She could see that the words moved Gaara. His face lightened slightly as he nodded a thanks in her direction. When the two of them finally made it through the rocky break in the walls, Sakura stopped dead on her feet at the long-awaited sight. The sunset was just how Kankuro had said it would be, absolutely beautiful. The sand dunes were high in the horizon, a dark, uneven backdrop for the sun to fall behind. The sun was currently balanced on the knife's edge of the farthest peak, trailing a woven blanket of every color of orange behind it. "Oh wow!" Sakura exclaimed as soon as she stepped out of the shadow and the auburn light illuminated her features. As she said it, Sakura began to hover suddenly as Gaara summoned up the sand at their feet, a compact disc suddenly materializing beneath them. Sakura had never been afraid of heights before, but when the floor shifted, her stomach almost came up to her throat. Before she could even ask what was going on, Gaara was stepping off the sand cloud and onto the lowest of the two ridges of the jagged end of the northwest wall. The kunoichi tailed him quickly as the sand began to crumble, and Gaara walked ahead of her like he wasn't quite aware of how unusual it was to fly people around on sand. "Do you do this often?" Sakura called out as the sand platform blew away in the wind and she stood staring out at the vast expanse of desert that rolled in amber waves before her. She had never been this high up in her lifetime. Sakura felt like she was on top of the world as the evening breeze ruffled her hair and she turned to look over the tops of the stucco houses belonging to Suna. "Sometimes when I need to get away and think, I come up here," he announced, taking a seat a little down from where she stood, an arm propped on his knee as he too gazed out at the place that shared his namesake, Gaara of the Desert. Even though Gaara was the case-cage and had an official office, Sakura suddenly realized that she was beholden to a king who was sitting on his real throne. Sakura took that as her cue to do the same, so she plopped down too, choosing to dangle her legs over the edge of this giant seat. "Thanks for bringing me up here," she said after a second, realizing suddenly that he might not share this with many people. Gaara offered her a small grin. "I never got to really thank you for what you did for my brother, what your team did for me." Ah, so that was it. When the Akatsuki came and abducted Gaara, Kankuro had been attacked and poisoned by Sasori. After developing an antidote that saved Kankuro's life, Sakura had joined the rest of her team to help rescue the case-cage. Even though Chiyo had been the one to technically revive Gaara by giving him her life, it seemed that the case-cage still felt indebted to Team 7 and other Leaf Shinobi involved. That was why Gaara was being especially kind during this visit. Sakura had seen Gaara several times before over the last couple of years and had met mostly with him during conferences or when he was around several advisors and council members. The last time she had convened with only him and his siblings, it was because Gaara had concerns about Sasuke, or rather unbeknownst to them at the time, it was actually a double of Sasuke. Sakura supposed this was why she met with Gaara's official and down-to-business persona more often than this normal, approachable version of him. It was so strange, Sakura thought as she observed the ninja a few feet away from her, how this leader with a heart had once been the monster Sakura had stared in the face as she stood guard over Sasuke. How different he was now in contrast to who he used to be. The case-cage had a bigger love for this village now than he had ever possessed in hatred, and it was a vision that gave Sakura hope for her own goal to restore happiness to this generation and the one before. If Gaara and Sasuke could come back from such darkness, why couldn't everyone else? "You're a friend," Sakura told him, "and to be honest," she confessed, "Naruto considers you one of his closest companions and your support of him and our village has been enough." And then Sakura told him about Naruto, how he was doing, what he had been up to recently, and what he was doing currently. Of course, Sakura couldn't contain the news that had only been recently shared with Sakura, herself. Gaara was surprised and overjoyed to hear about the new member that Naruto and Hinata would soon welcome to their family. And then the case-cage admitted something to her that he had been thinking about doing in regards to family. "I wouldn't be against adoption, myself. It's something new I am considering." "Really?" Sakura beamed, delighted too for this man who would make any child an excellent father figure despite having a bad past with his own. The children's clinic has had its own impact on me, you could say. Sakura smiled again at such a compliment, and the case cage added rapidly, I think I'll wait a while yet to make an official decision. Something that big needs a lot of thought. Sakura couldn't help but agree. Gaara was the case cage after all, and a very young one at that. His responsibilities grew by day, and a child would definitely complicate things. Sakura also imagined that the council probably pressured him when it came to marriage and other long-term commitments. Everything would probably be filtered through his advisors first. Sakura sighed, thinking of her own future. She was on such unlevel ground with Sasuke, who knew if she would ever marry or have children with the love of her life. If not with him, would she ever find that sort of happiness with someone that leads to building a family? She had told Sasuke she wouldn't move on, and maybe in her heart, she never would. If this was to be her outcome, then she could always adopt like Gaara. Maybe someone like Isao, who needed a mother desperately in their life, would be the child to make Sakura a mother. It seemed Gaara's main purpose of visiting was because he needed to talk to her about some intel, because he announced to her, I'm afraid I'll be rather occupied during the next few days, Kankuro too. We have had some trouble along the border between Sunagaku and the neighboring counties. Sakura's ears pricked, and her eyes widened at the information. Her thoughts immediately jumped to Sasuke, who she imagined to be in the desert surrounding Suna this very minute. What if something had happened? Before her over-analytical brain could begin creating imaginary scenarios, Sakura asked, what sort of trouble? He clarified by saying, rumors mostly about travelers. A few have been stirring up trouble as they pass through local towns. Kankuro has gone to investigate these reports. Sakura sincerely hoped this had nothing to do with the masked ninja that had attacked her and Sasuke during their passage through Tanagaku. She quickly relayed the story to Gaara, recalling all the details as if it had only occurred yesterday. The case cage listened patiently and even asked her to illustrate the strangers several times so he could commit the description to memory. I should have mentioned it earlier, she apologized once she finished conveying the distressing event. I'm just glad you did, the case cage solaced positively. I'll inform Kankuro immediately. Sasuke Uchiha had been stuck in that damn core dimension for 3 nights straight. After his failed attempt to circumvent it completely by transporting directly to Kagaya's connected sand dimension, Sasuke had spent the night laying on his back in the dirt. As he rested immobilized in the sand, Sasuke remembered how Kakashi used to get physical after overusing his Sharingan. His former sensei, not being an Uchiha, would be bedridden for days as the result of depleted chakra levels. Sasuke knew that the same thing was happening to him. According to Hagoromo, Sasuke was the reincarnation of Indra, and an Uchiha at that, and was therefore a natural candidate for the Rinnegan once Hagoromo's chakra had been introduced. In other words, it wasn't an issue of heritage that was causing this fatigue, but he knew it was similar to Kakashi's situation in that Sasuke was overusing a power that had not once belonged to him. More simply, it was like overusing the Mangekyo once gained, that is until one achieved the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan through transplant of a relative's eyes and then no longer experienced the negative side effects. In any case, Sasuke hadn't been able to hardly move the first night after the attempt and had contemplated just how he would be able to achieve the next step in this dimension traveling process. First, he desperately needed more chakra. Granted, he had never been able to do what he had done before, and Sasuke believed that his theory of being in the dimension's double, the desert, was what had made summoning its portal even possible. He needed more chakra, had to have it despite his efforts around it. It was the only way to pull this off. On the second and third nights, Sasuke had managed to walk over and find a small incline of rock and took shelter under the ledge while he rested. Sasuke had thought that if he recovered quickly enough, he might try teleporting to the sand dimension a second time at the same spot where the rift in time-space might be weaker now. Maybe that was his next step. But when the next morning came, and Sasuke could manage heavy walking, he found himself stumbling slowly across the vast red dune dimension in the opposite direction, back south towards Sunagakure. While his body worked up enough chakra to teleport back into his own realm, Sasuke had decided to hike the distance in this dimension, so that when he teleported, he wouldn't have much travel time left towards the village. Sasuke didn't admit to himself at first that it was his reoccurring thoughts of Sakura that had him calling it quits early. The Uchiha had dreamt another delusion again where Sakura needed his protection from an unknown enemy, and when Sasuke woke, he had reasoned with himself that it was all imaginary and there was no need to worry. Regardless, Sasuke found himself on his feet soon afterwards. He knew without a doubt that his female companion was more than capable of taking care of herself and was probably focused on her own work without a second thought about him, but his worry still persisted. Sasuke felt that he at least needed to check on her just to make sure that she was being careful, cautious, and of course, not overworking herself. Naruto and Kakashi would want him while she was in his care, right? What Sasuke also told himself as he neared the end of his journey was that he needed time to contemplate his current issue with chakra reserves and recover completely anyway. Maybe Sakura could advise him in this entire situation, being one of the world's leading experts in medical science. When the tomatoes finally reappeared on his Rinnegan, Sasuke breathed in and ripped a hole in space, a black vortex spiraling in the air before him. When Sasuke stepped through the portal, he reappeared on the dunes bordering the northern wall of the sand village. Sasuke breathed in the sudden surge of oxygen blown to him from the western wind and noticed that the sun had almost completely set. It was dusk now and a purple sky greeted his return. A few minutes more and darkness would completely settle on the sand village. Sasuke thought it would be best if he headed straight to his lodging since that was where Sakura would soon be heading if she was leaving the hospital. Or at least, he hoped so. When Sasuke made his way along the wall towards the western opening, the same path he had taken on his way out of the village, he soon realized his assumption about Sakura's current location had been wrong. Her voice rang like a familiar hailing bell somewhere in the air above him, and when he located it as he rounded the corner, his relief was a palpable weight off his shoulders. His pink-haired teammate was sitting up on top of a bluff near the exit, unhurt and completely unaware of his presence as she watched the sun sink below the mountains of sand at his right. The very next second Sasuke realized that she was talking to a person sitting next to her, and Sasuke's relief turned acidic as he narrowed his eyes at Gaara, the Kazekage who was apparently partaking in the sunset view with her. So, he thought to himself, Sakura had been fine all along. The entire trek here he had been thinking of her, and it made Sasuke a little bitter to see her free from the same type of thinking. From the looks of it, she was more than fine. Sasuke checked his unmasked glare then, because he was suddenly peering up into the scrutinizing assessment of the silent Kazekage, who had been observing every emotion that Sasuke had let slip onto his face. In the second that Sasuke's eyes had fallen on Sakura, Gaara must have sensed the Uchiha's presence and had focused on him before Sasuke had even registered the sand wielder. Sasuke wiped his expression immediately with embarrassment of being caught, inclining a respectful nod towards the ninja who was currently their host. Sasuke should be grateful to the man for looking after her, not showing him disrespect. Gaara turned to Sakura then, mumbling something quietly that not even Sasuke could register. He assumed it was a farewell because the Kazekage stood as Sakura gazed up at him, still oblivious to the eyes that watched her from below. Gaara picked a kunai out of his pocket and stuck it into the ground beside her before stepping out onto a platform of sand that materialized before him. With a gesture towards Sakura, Gaara lowered himself on the other side of the wall and disappeared over the tops of the village buildings. Just as Gaara had anticipated, Sasuke summoned the small amount of chakra it possessed to switch places with the kunai that Gaara had put in place for him. The simple act made Sasuke feel even more guilty for the look he gave him seconds earlier. The Uchiha's guilt changed to shame when he appeared on his feet beside his traveling companion, and Sakura jumped up with joy at seeing him suddenly beside her. "Sasuke!" she exclaimed, walking up to him and beaming up at him. "I didn't know you were back." "Just arrived," he grunted tiredly, instantly relaxing by taking Gaara's seat on the ledge. "Why are you up here?" "To watch the sunset," she innocently gestured outward towards the sky. "I hadn't done so yet, so Gaara brought me. Isn't it beautiful?" Sasuke tried not to be annoyed at that statement. In what circumstances had the Kazekage or Sakura thought it a good idea to bring up sunset viewing? Sasuke supposed he still was a little bothered because before he could stop them, the words came out. "And what did the Kazekage say?" Sakura crouched down on her knees beside him and began explaining their entire conversation. Sasuke's irritation was replaced with intrigue as Sakura educated Sasuke about the reports of criminal-like activity on the outskirts of the village. Gaara had made the effort to talk to her about this because it would help explain his and Kankuro's upcoming absence over the next few days as they investigated the rumors. Sakura had also informed the Kazekage about their most recent encounter with strange ninja. At the mention of it, Sasuke was just relieved to hear that ninja hadn't made an appearance here while he was away. Sasuke also felt relieved that the entire situation was now in the Kazecage's hands. Perhaps the encounter with their attackers had been a random occurrence after all, and Sasuke wouldn't have to hear anything more about it. As she continued to catch him up, Sasuke leaned wearily against the wall of rock behind him and watched her talk from the corner of his eye. Sasuke noticed abruptly that she was wearing the clothes that he had bought for her before he left. Despite the plainness of the style, she made them work wonderfully, and Sasuke was thankful that he had guessed the fit right. The looser, more modest top had been intentionally picked and swayed around her agreeably. The light was fading now as stars began to prickle the dark purple horizon, and a large rosy moon, too, made an appearance on the skyline. Sakura's braided hair was a shade darker in the dimness, and Sasuke recognized that it was longer now, just below her shoulders. Soft fingers suddenly brushing his head had Sasuke refocusing on Sakura's words. Her expression was one of concern as she assessed him for any signs of injury, a lifelong habit. As Sakura leaned forward with a fretful assessment, Sasuke pressed the fingertips reassuringly that dangled over his palm. "Just a little tired is all," he admitted. Sakura didn't take her hand away as she scooted back against the wall beside him. Sasuke didn't move his either, even though he tried desperately to convince himself to. He really shouldn't have grasped her fingers, Sasuke told himself. But this wasn't bad, was it? Their hands were just grazing one another. That didn't mean they were holding hands. He wasn't violating a boundary by resting his knuckles against hers. "Tell me," she spoke evenly, seemingly unaffected by their sudden nearness, "what you've been doing for the past 3 days." And so he did. All of it. Her face changed to one of uneasiness again as he explained why his absence was so long. He had run out of chakra and spent 2 days waiting for enough of it to return before he could make the voyage back. He enlightened her about his plan for the next attempt, trying it twice in succession, the first to open the door, and the second effort a day later while using the same door to see if that would get him further. When Sakura pulled away her hand abruptly and placed it on her leg, Sasuke frowned and fisted his own in response. He backtracked, trying desperately to remember what he might have said that would make her upset. Sasuke instantly knew something was wrong and wanted to ask her about it, but Sasuke had a sinking feeling that it was related to him. He saved the trouble of asking as Sakura beheld the sky again and said quietly, "You didn't say goodbye. I didn't know that you had left." Sasuke looked down into his lap, fisted hand now resting on his knee. Sasuke a few years ago would have instantly responded with, "I don't have to tell you anything," but he wasn't that Sasuke anymore. He wanted to tell her that he had tried to go to her but had lost his nerve when Kankuro came out of the greenhouse and caught him looking for her. The reality was that he didn't have enough steel to stray from the comfort zone of his reserved behavior in front of others. Maybe privately, just between them, Sasuke could have found her and told her he was leaving. But how could he explain that to her without looking like a total coward? When he hesitated to reply, Sakura whispered in the darkness. I thought we had a partnership. He returned his gaze to her then, recalling their conversation on the way here about a trust that involved the both of them working together. That's what he had wanted. A partnership where he wasn't the sole receiver. But how could a partnership work while they were away on separate missions? He had his own mission and she had hers. Sasuke couldn't help but feel annoyed about this entire circumstance. Hadn't he just come back to check on her? Wasn't he getting distracted from the one goal that the entire world depended on him for? I'm sorry, he admitted quietly. Then he added, this is how it is for me. I have to leave when I can. You can at least tell me you're leaving, Sakura interrupted, still not making eye contact with him. It unnerved him for her to do so. She always made eye contact with him. I understand that you have to leave, I don't expect any different. But a part of a partnership is communication. Communication. Between two people who couldn't ever really be together. He cared about Sakura, he really did. If all she wanted was communication, couldn't Sasuke give her that? Isn't that what she had asked of him back in the Leaf 2? Stop dodging me, she had tried to bargain. More of her words rang in his memory. We don't have to be together to love each other, Sasuke. So, maybe they didn't, but communication alone wasn't a relationship that Sakura deserved. She added again in his silence, remember when I had run off to bathe in the woods and you came to find me? Sasuke instantly wanted to say, no, just out of mortification, but Sakura finished by saying, you had asked me to tell you where I was going before I ran off. How you felt in that moment is how I felt when I realized that you weren't coming back to our room. I need you to do at least that, to tell me you're leaving. Sasuke's heart softened and his resolve wavered. It was the imagining of her in that equal amount of distress that had the Uchiha fessing up. I meant to say goodbye. I went to the greenhouse, but, you were talking to people, so. Sakura turned to meet his eyes then and Sasuke felt both shyness and instant relief at the action. To the Uchiha, it was a sign that Sakura's resentment was passing. Sasuke thought that he might personally prefer the animated angry Sakura that gave him a black eye to this silent one. You did? She asked, her voice lightening considerably. She searched his face for more information that Sasuke didn't want to give her. The whole point was that he didn't, right? Sasuke's smirk was a reaction that his body didn't make often. I'll leave a note next time. He would do at least that for her, say goodbye in some way. I'll take it, she smiled in response, elbowing him in the chest and leaning her side fully against his own despite his surprised expression. She ignored him and watched the moon's progression as it turned into a snowy white, all color gone from the atmosphere now. Her warmth was a comfort that Sasuke hadn't realized he'd missed while he was away. When they had parted, Sasuke had felt like he had lost his arm again, and now, it felt like a limb had been given back to him. No, he realized, not a limb. An organ. She was one of several pieces of his heart, a valve that Sasuke knew he couldn't live without, didn't want to live without. But he had to. Like Itachi had for the world, Sasuke would have to cut out his heart and learn to live without it. Sakura found herself incredibly nervous as they made their way through the dim alleyways of Sunagaku towards their housing. Unlike Konoha, whose evening streets were alive with activity and lights, only the occasional lantern lit a window in the sand village. Sakura theorized that perhaps it was a fire risk to brighten the streets with firelight, being that heavy winds traveled between buildings and rushed houses. The wind was especially strong at this very moment as she and Sasuke strode up the path towards the little inn adjacent to the hospital. It didn't seem to be bothering Sasuke much, The only thing that flapped around him was his poncho. Sakura, on the other hand, clung desperately to her unraveling hair that was a perfect metaphorical illustration for her unraveling nerves. "Welcome back, sir," she exclaimed as the two of them entered, her eyes quickly assessing Sasuke's unexpected return. Sakura couldn't help but notice how recurrently dead the place seemed despite the innkeeper's claim of full capacity 4 days ago. Sakura expressed her thoughts to Sasuke as they made the climb together up the 2 flights of stairs. She only spoke because there wasn't anything else she could think to say. "Don't you feel something off about this place? All the doors are shut like they're full, but I haven't met a single soul while here." Sasuke answered emotionlessly with, "That's because no one else is here, at least not on our floor. I think it's intentional." Sakura blinked at that statement. Our host seemed certain that we had one of the last remaining rooms. "What do you mean by intentional?" "Gaara vacated the place. I thought at first he did it because of safety measures, but I'm not sure." "Safety from what?" Sakura frowned when she quickly realized Sasuke was talking about himself. Did the Kazekage really think that lowly of the ex-convict Uchiha that he would actually evacuate an inn? Sakura chose to give Gaara, the man who had taken her to see the sunset, the benefit of the doubt. It seemed Sasuke was doing the same. She blushed as she considered the other possibility. The only other conclusion she could make was that Kankuro and Gaara had taken the time to ensure their safety, or privacy. That thought did not help her tangled anxiety. When Sasuke opened the door to their room and walked in, Sakura couldn't help but hesitate. He glanced back at her, reading her as easily as a book, and in response, Sakura giggled awkwardly, apprehensively before crossing the threshold and closing the door behind her. After a few minutes of mutual silence, Sakura suggested hurriedly, "How about you take a seat and I'll check on you really quick before you go to sleep. Just to make sure you're okay." He nodded, possibly too tired to argue with her. The Uchiha was practically dead on his feet and it was hard to tell if he was experiencing even a fraction of the turmoil that was currently taking place inside of Sakura's stomach. It had been more obvious when they first stayed together. She was the collected one and Sasuke had tossed on the floor all night. Now, it seemed it was reversed. Her bed, she noticed, was messily ruffled from 2 nights ago. She hadn't been able to tidy it that morning because she was late and then had stayed at the hospital last night with Isao. Sasuke turned to his own bed instead, seating himself and beginning to remove his shoes. He reached behind him and pulled the poncho over his head, leaving behind the black high-necked long sleeve. Slipping a thumb up under his hair wrap, he removed the firm binding and sand showered from his hair. He shook it all loose and then dusted the loose sand off his pants and quilt. Taking a panicky breath, Sakura made her way over to him and Sasuke stared indifferently off into space as she touched his forehead with her glowing fingers. He sighed unexpectedly and closed his eyes at her attempt to soothe the pulsing behind his forehead. "Does that feel better?" she asked him, taking the palm of her hand and closing his eyelids with it. The green light of her jutsu flared again, and Sakura focused her energy to the back of Sasuke's Rinnegan, soothing the optic nerve and the pathways connected to the brain. She got an exhausted mumble in response to her question, which made Sakura grin. "I think I have a solution for your chakra depletion, too," the kunoichi announced as she pulled forward Sasuke's left shoulder. "It's been a while. Let's have a quick look at this arm." "You do." He responded to her first statement, a small spike of energy returning as Sasuke shrugged off his undershirt, giving her easy access to the firm bandaging around what remained of his bicep. "They're not the best tasting, but I can make you my own version of the military ration pills, or food pills, if you'd rather," she offered, simultaneously stripping the dressings and placing a hand under his arm and raising it so she could easily observe the scar tissue. Sakura was pleased with the overall healing of this injury, but she still hoped that she might be able to rid Sasuke of the brutal scarring one day if he ever let her. "The purpose of the food pills is to supply you with chakra for several days in succession. You'll experience the same exhaustion afterwards, but these will help you get the chakra you need for a short period of time. You'll have to eat many, but they should do the trick. She explained all this while wrapping the dismembered limb. I first made them for Naruto back when he was trying to master chakra shape transformation while using shadow clones. Sasuke, Tisuke, Ed at their headstrong friend and Sakura smiled again. You can come with me tomorrow to the greenhouse, and I'll cook you up a batch. Sasuke nodded sleepily at her offer. He had been correct in his theory that if anyone could help him figure out a solution to his current circumstances, it would be Sakura. Sasuke was knowledgeable about the use of food pills, but they weren't the easiest things to come by. In fact, Konoha's medics only made so many a year and Sasuke honestly hadn't even took them into consideration. He supposed situations changed when you had a medic as a friend and she just happened to make a special recipe of food pills. There, she nodded while tying off the end of his new bandage. Sasuke lulled at the feeling of her fingers dancing over his skin with such professional practice. He did a poor job of the wrappings with one arm, so it was nice to have someone else do it for once. Sasuke's fatigue rapidly faded as the pink-haired medic leaned forward to release his arm and her shirt slid slightly to the left across her collarbone. Spotting the dark discoloration of a bruise just beneath the bone, Sasuke's eyes widened and his right hand shot out and grabbed Sakura's elbow before she could turn completely around. What is that? Sasuke scowled, standing as he rotated Sakura's body to fully face him again. What? She asked unknowingly, disquiet jumping to the planes of her face at his sudden forcefulness. This, he growled, releasing her elbow and using the end of his fingers to move the fabric away from her skin. As Sasuke placed his fingertips next to the mark, he couldn't help but compare the size of them to the spot, and he made the connection almost instantly. Oh, Sakura frowned down at the purple blotch, suddenly realizing the bruise was there herself. I didn't realize, she began, moving away from his touch, then stopped her words when she saw the murderous stare he was giving the minuscule injury. Who did that to you? He breathed, red beginning to stain his vision. There was an electricity forming beneath his skin and Sasuke couldn't breathe. Somebody had shoved their fingers into her chest. Bruised her. In that moment, Sasuke knew instantly that he'd find and mutilate that person, whoever it was, accident or not, for even daring to lay their hands on her. Sasuke, Sakura was saying, trying to reach him despite the ringing in his ears. I'll tell you, but you have to promise me you're not going to Overia. Making eye contact with her again, Sasuke stepped up to her and requested a second time for the name he was wanting. Who was it? There was a moment of frigid silence between them as they stood searching each other's eyes. And then Sakura's hands found his waist and she slid them across his sides and buried her head in his chest. She clutched his bare back and spoke into his skin. Stop. Let me explain. She clung to him like a stubborn leech as Sasuke tried to remove her from his body. He tried reaching his arm down between them to pry her off, but her forearms remained secure around him. Damn her inhuman strength. His anger began to ebb as she awkwardly mumbled the story into his ribcage. During their skirmish, they had somehow ended up on the ground, and Sakura pinned his good arm to his side, pissing the Uchiha off because he knew that she was taking advantage of his one-armedness. The entire time Sakura described her experience with an unnamed patient's unnamed father, Sasuke was crossly forced to listen to the episode via wrestling. Their tussle talk ended when the Uchiha finally was made to agree with, I promise I won't do anything, just get off me. When her weight suddenly removed from his back and Sasuke flipped over with a huge breath of air, he shot her a glare. Don't ever do that again, he hissed in the kunoichi's direction as she grinned embarrassingly down at him. She reached down for his hand and he reluctantly gave it to her. She was just fortunate that Sasuke was too tired to knock her hand away. As she helped him to his feet, she said, I'm flattered at your concern, but I can't have you going Chunin exam psycho right now. What? He growled, and she dropped his hand. Stalking over to his bed, Sasuke sat firmly down and propped his pouty chin into his palm, feeling suddenly even more tired than before. I don't go psycho, he grumbled despite the fact that they both knew that was an obvious lie. He'd gone crazy plenty of times. And I'm not concerned, he spit out angrily, tossing a pillow down on his bed and flipping onto his stomach. Naruto and Kakashi would be. Yeah, she waved off his excuse and Sasuke stopped speaking. He still grumpily narrowed his eyes at her over the rim of his pillow before turning on his side completely, cutting off all conversation. She didn't take the hint, because seconds later she announced that she was showering and then going to bed. He responded with more force and exasperation than he really needed to. Okay, so, maybe he had gone just a little pre-psycho to this whole bruise situation. Sakura referenced the Chunin exams and Sasuke recalled the incident she specified. When Sasuke had woken from his slumber, it was the effects of the curse mark that had the Uchiha turning his wrath on their enemies with fierce brutality. It was the rush of dark power that had turned Sasuke into a murderous psycho. So what was his problem now? A year ago, he wouldn't have displayed something even close to the same reaction. He would have blamed Sakura for getting herself into the situation to begin with, and at the most, may have even told her to be more careful who she pissed off. But just a few minutes ago, Sasuke had felt like he did back in the Forest of Death, and yet he no longer had the curse mark. So why? Sasuke had once always felt the desire to protect Sakura and maybe his reaction was just that feeling returning again now that they were friends again. It's not just that, his own voice enlightened him. Sasuke had in fact gone after Sakura when he heard about Kido kidnapping her, but the worst he had done in retaliation was surround ninja with fire and use genjutsu on one of them. But a few minutes ago, he was contemplating just how he'd stab more than fingers into the person's chest who'd touched her. Sasuke breathed out his anger again, hoping it would help him stop being so intense about it. Sasuke couldn't fall asleep as he tried to contemplate any other reason that would explain his actions besides the obvious answer. It had been obvious for some time now honestly, but Sasuke had denied it up until this point. Sasuke was in love with Sakura, and an Uchiha didn't need to have a curse mark to be irrational when someone threatened his loved one. It had been a slow progression, but Sasuke had been slowly allowing himself to believe and accept the truth he'd always known. But what could he do about it now? When Sakura finished showering, Sasuke pretended to doze heavily, so she put out the lights and padded lightly across the moonlit floor to her own bed. Despite how exhausted Sasuke was, he would never forget the night where he listened to the sound of Sakura's even breathing as his heart ached, knowing that what he wanted, Sasuke could never have.